This evening, listeners are invited to embark on a captivating odyssey into the whispered chronicles of ancient Greece. These are not mere fables. They are profound narratives that echo through millennia, meticulously preserved and lovingly transmitted across countless generations, much like cherished heirlooms passed from elder to kin. As the day's clamour recedes, much like the ephemeral morning mist over the cerulean Aegean, an atmospheric setting is encouraged, allowing for full immersion into these timeless narratives. Indeed, there exists an undeniable enchantment in collectively exploring these foundational myths, tales that bridge the vast chasm of time, with a suitable ambient quietude, perhaps accompanied by a gentle, unobtrusive background hum. The stage is set for a journey back to an epoch when divine beings often descended from their Olympian heights to interact with mortals, and where every craggy peak and shadowed valley was rumoured to guard a profound secret. One might envision a journey through the verdant heart of an ancient Greek forest. The very air, rich and invigorating, is imbued with the pungent aroma of ancient pine needles and the subtle fragrance of wild, untamed herbs. Above, a dappled luminescence, filtering through the dense, interwoven canopy, descends to create shifting mosaics of golden warmth upon the forest's earth. It is within this very sanctuary that the unfolding drama of our initial narrative commences, a realm scarcely trodden by mortal feet, and the chosen domain where the formidable goddess Artemis found her deepest solace. Artemis, it must be understood, was a deity distinct from her Olympian peers, who often revelled in the bustling social intricacies and grand spectacles of Mount Olympus. She was revered as the untamed goddess of the hunt, the vigilant protector of all wild creatures, and a divine being who held her cherished privacy as paramount, above virtually all other considerations. While other gods engaged in opulent banquets and tempestuous disagreements, Artemis sought refuge in the serene solitude of the untamed wilderness, accompanied only by her loyal retinue of hunting companions. On this particular afternoon, Artemis had been pursuing her quarry since the first blush of dawn. Her iconic silver bow, a beacon of ethereal light, caught and reflected the dappled sunlight, casting fleeting glints through the forest. Her disciplined pack of hunting hounds moved with an almost preternatural silence, their paws barely disturbing the delicate underbrush as they kept pace beside her. Yet now, as the sun reached its zenith, casting the world in a brilliant, unyielding glow, the goddess craved a different kind of solace. The time had come for a refreshing immersion, a ritualistic cleansing. Deep within this ancient woodland, a place shrouded in natural secrecy, veiled by a dense, cascading curtain of hanging willow branches, lay Artemis's secluded, sacrosanct bathing pool. Its pristine waters were nourished by a natural spring, bubbling forth from the earth's subterranean depths, perpetually cool and astonishingly crystal clear. The pool's bed was intricately paved with smooth, water-worn stones, while a verdant carpet of soft moss clung to the rocks encircling its serene periphery. It was a haven of such profound tranquillity that it naturally elicited a hushed reverence, even in utter solitude. Artemis, with practised grace, parted the verdant veil of willow branches and stepped into her clandestine sanctuary. Her loyal hunting companions, a retinue of nymphs who had forsaken their traditional abodes in rivers and trees to serve the goddess, commenced assisting her in divesting her hunting accoutrements. They deftly unlaced her sturdy leather boots, removed her quiver brimming with radiant silver arrows, and reverently placed her invaluable bow aside. The goddess then stepped into the cool, inviting water with a profound sigh of utter contentment. This, she knew, was the zenith of her daily rituals, a precious interlude where she could momentarily shed the mantle of a formidable Olympian, embracing instead the unadulterated pleasure of the cool, life-giving water caressing her skin after an arduous morning spent in pursuit of game. Yet, unbeknownst to the serene goddess, a pivotal and perilous deviation was about to irrevocably alter the course of this narrative. Not far from her sacred pool, a young mortal hunter named Actaeon was forging a far less graceful, indeed rather boisterous, path through the dense woodland. Actaeon, while possessing considerable prowess as a hunter, found that his attentiveness to his surroundings, particularly the sanctity of the natural world, often proved woefully lacking. He had spent the entire morning in relentless pursuit of a particularly elusive and cunning deer, faithfully following its distinctive hoofprints deeper and deeper into the forest's labyrinthine embrace. His own eager hunting dogs, their senses acutely honed, ran ahead of him, their noses pressed diligently to the ground, completely engrossed in the faint, intoxicating scent trail. However, a critical truth remained tragically hidden from the mortal hunter. Actaeon, in his single-minded pursuit, was unwittingly trespassing upon hallowed, consecrated ground. This particular expanse of the forest was consecrated to Artemis, a domain where mortals were unequivocally forbidden to tread. Naturally, there were no explicit markers or prohibitions, for this was ancient Greece, not a contemporary nature preserve with designated boundaries. Yet a palpable aura pervaded the very atmosphere, an almost visceral sense of ancient, untamed power that, had he been more attuned, should have served as an urgent, undeniable warning to retreat. Actaeon, relentless in his chase, forced his way through a particularly dense thicket of undergrowth, drawn by the subtle murmur of flowing water. He was speculating that his elusive quarry might have paused there for a refreshing drink. His usually boisterous dogs had fallen silent, a telltale sign that they were nearing their unsuspecting prey. And then, with an abruptness that defied all expectation, he found himself poised at the very precipice of Artemis's clandestine pool, a sight no mortal was ever meant to behold. In that suspended instant, the very fabric of time appeared to unravel and cease. Artemis, resplendent in the crystal waters encircled by her attendant nymphs, lifted her gaze to confront this utterly unexpected intruder. An expression of profound shock etched upon her divine features. Her luminous silver eyes, initially wide with profound shock, swiftly contracted into dangerous piercing slits. One might reasonably assume that Actaeon, upon realizing his egregious error, would have immediately offered a fervent apology and fled in terror. Indeed, such a swift retreat would have been the most prudent course of action. Instead, he remained utterly transfixed, his gaze unwavering. Was it the sheer magnitude of his transgression that paralyzed him, or perhaps the raw, unearthly beauty of the goddess herself, an Olympian vision, had rendered him utterly mesmerized, unable to reconcile the impossible reality before his eyes? The attendant nymphs, with synchronized gasps of alarm, instinctively moved to interpose themselves, attempting to shield their divine mistress from the mortal's gaze. But the critical moment had passed. It was already too late. Actaeon had already witnessed that which no mortal was ever permitted to behold, and Artemis, the formidable goddess of the hunt and unyielding protector of privacy, was now consumed by an incandescent fury. Yet a compelling truth about the Olympian deities often reveals itself in moments of their wrath. Their displeasure seldom manifested as mere verbal reprimand. Instead, they frequently favoured intricate and profoundly creative forms of retribution. And Artemis, whose very essence was intertwined with the sanctity of her solitude, was renowned for her particularly imaginative and severe responses to those who dared violate her sacred privacy. With deliberate, ominous grace, she raised her hand and scooped a handful of the crystalline spring water. As it cupped within her divine palms, the water began to shimmer with an otherworldly luminescence, imbued with raw divine power. Without uttering a single word, her gaze piercing and resolute, she unleashed the enchanted water directly towards Actaeon's face. The divine liquid struck him like a burst of liquid starlight. For a fleeting moment, Actaeon experienced nothing but a fleeting coolness against his skin. Then, with a creeping, unsettling slowness, a profound and inexplicable transformation began to unfold within him. It was his reflection in the tranquil pool that first betrayed the horror. Where his familiar human visage should have appeared, now revealed a grotesque metamorphosis. His nose elongated and darkened, his ears grew disproportionately, shifting their position to the crown of his head. And then, with an agonizing, irresistible force, nascent antlers, raw and formidable, began to push through his very skull. In a desperate, primal surge of terror and regret, Actaeon attempted to cry out, to offer a fervent apology, to articulate that his intrusion had been entirely unintentional. But from his throat emerged no human utterance, only the panicked, high-pitched bleat of a frightened deer. His hands, once capable and familiar, now morphed into hard, cloven hooves as he gazed upon them in horror. His garments, once tailored to his human form, now hung grotesquely loose as his body rapidly diminished and reshaped. His human consciousness, agonizingly intact, remained imprisoned within, yet his physical form was now irrevocably that of a magnificent, fully grown stag. And then a sound reached him that made his newly formed deer heart hammer with an unbearable terror. The unmistakable, baying chorus of barking dogs. His very own hunting dogs, alerted by the unusual sounds of his agonizing transformation, now came bounding into view, their keen senses failing to recognize their beloved master. Instead, their instincts, honed by countless hunts, registered only the formidable presence of a large stag, conveniently located near their accustomed hunting grounds, and they reacted as their training dictated. In a desperate, futile attempt, Actaeon tried to communicate, to make them comprehend his true identity, to break through the veil of his monstrous disguise. But the language of deer is alien to the ears of hounds, and his once faithful companions tragically saw only a prized quarry where their master had stood moments before, their loyal devotion now irrevocably twisted into a primal, deadly instinct. What transpired next was perhaps the most profoundly tragic chapter of this entire narrative. Actaeon, his human intellect agonizingly intact within the confines of a deer's body, was forced to flee for his very life from his own cherished and once loyal hunting pack. Panic-stricken, he thrashed wildly through the dense forest, desperately leaping over fallen logs and frantically dodging between ancient trees, while behind him, His relentless dogs pursued with the same ferocious enthusiasm they had always displayed when hunting alongside their master. He ran until his transformed legs buckled and shook with sheer exhaustion. He sought fleeting refuge behind ancient rocks and within impenetrable thickets. But inexorably, as the sun began its slow, crimson descent towards the horizon, his own relentless dogs finally closed in upon him, sealing his horrifying fate. Meanwhile, back at the tranquil pool, Artemis had concluded her sacred ablutions and meticulously donned her formidable hunting attire once more. Her attendant nymphs, still visibly shaken, clustered around her, their hushed whispers revolving around the audacious mortal who had so brazenly desecrated their sacred space. "Did you have to be quite so harsh?" One of the nymphs ventured, her voice barely above a whisper. He seemed so young. Perhaps he was merely lost. Artemis, with an air of cold deliberation, retrieved her luminous silver bow, testing its taut string with a single, elegant finger. The resulting soft musical thrum resonated briefly through the hushed forest. "Privacy," she stated with chilling simplicity, "is inviolable. Mortals," she asserted, "are compelled to comprehend that certain divine boundaries are never to be transgressed, not even through unwitting error." She paused for a moment, her keen senses attuned to the distant sounds of the forest. From the distant depths of the forest, the triumphant baying of dogs reached her ears. A subtle, almost imperceptible flicker of understanding crossed her divine features. She knew precisely what those sounds signified. "Besides," she added, though her tone perhaps carried a fraction more nuance than before, "he was a hunter himself." He possessed an intrinsic understanding of the intricate, often brutal relationship between predator and prey. Now, she concluded, her voice carrying an undeniable finality, he has been granted the unique, albeit terrifying opportunity to experience both sides of that primal dynamic. As night's impenetrable cloak descended over the ancient forest, Artemis and her divine companions melted into the deepening shadows that clung to the ancient trees, leaving behind only the perpetual murmur of the bubbling spring and the mournful whisper of the wind sifting through the willow branches. Yet, as the echoes of this ancient tragedy fade, a profound and lingering question invariably arises. Was Artemis's swift and brutal retribution solely a defense of her sacred privacy, or, as many scholars of myth propose, was a far more intricate and profound cosmic lesson being imparted here? In the ancient world, it was widely believed that the Olympian gods, in their inscrutable wisdom, sometimes employed harsh lessons to impress upon mortals vital truths concerning respect for the divine, the inviolability of sacred boundaries, and the inexorable consequences that stem from one's choices, however seemingly minor. And what of Actaeon himself? Indeed, various interpretations of this enduring myth circulate. Some suggest Actaeon's transgression was not entirely accidental, hinting at a deliberate, hubristic quest to glimpse the divine. Conversely, other accounts paint him as a truly unfortunate hunter, genuinely lost and merely stumbling into a forbidden realm at the most inauspicious moment. The enduring dilemma remains: was Artemis's punishment justly proportioned, or did it far exceed the severity of what might have been an innocent, if monumental, error? One is left to ponder, had they been in Actaeon's perilous position, whether they would have instinctively recoiled and fled the instant the forbidden sight registered, or if, like Actaeon, they would have been rendered utterly immobile by the sheer, overwhelming spectacle of the divine. The profound query concerning equitable retribution inevitably leads into a considerably more sombre chronicle of familial dread and the dreadful deeds individuals commit when gripped by the terror of relinquishing authority. If the actions of Artemis towards Actaeon seemed severe, one must prepare for the harrowing account of Cronus and the atrocities he inflicted upon his own progeny. Let us journey even further back into the primordial epoch, to the very inception of the cosmos as perceived by the ancient Hellenes. This era predated the reign of Zeus from the majestic heights of Mount Olympus, preceding the construction of any temples or the establishment of human settlements. Indeed, before humanity itself existed. In those nascent days, the terrestrial realm was governed by entities known as Titans, colossal and immensely potent beings who were the direct offspring and subsequent generations of the earth primordial. And the sovereign ruler of all these Titans was Cronus. Now, Cronus did not ascend to his royal station through any form of democratic mandate or a tranquil succession of inheritance. On the contrary, he had seized dominion by perpetrating a horrific act against his own progenitor, Uranus, employing a crescent-shaped blade presented to him by his mother. Cronus had launched a brutal assault upon Uranus, orchestrating a violent overthrow that sent tremors through the very fabric of existence. One might logically surmise that a successful usurpation of his father's throne would have instilled in Cronus a sense of security in his newfound supremacy. However, the precise opposite proved true. Each waking moment was consumed by the dread of suffering an identical fate. Every evening, as he sought repose, his mind was tormented by the suspicion that one of his own offspring might be conspiring against him, mirroring the very treachery he had visited upon his own father. And then, one fateful day, Cronus received a divine pronouncement that rendered his most profound anxieties almost trivial in comparison. This ominous prophecy emanated directly from the fates themselves. Three venerable sisters possessing the extraordinary ability to discern the intricate threads of destiny woven into the future. Their pronouncement was straightforward, utterly terrifying, and utterly impossible to disregard. One of your children shall depose you just as you deposed your father. Typically, upon receiving such disquieting revelations about what the future holds, most individuals might endeavour to alter their conduct in an attempt to avert the undesirable outcome. They might, for instance, resolve to cultivate a more nurturing parental role, or to raise their progeny with an abundance of affection and a diminished measure of apprehension. Cronus lamentably opted for a far more direct and brutal methodology. He concluded that if he possessed no offspring, then no child could ever rise to overthrow him. Yet a significant predicament presented itself. Cronus was already wedded to his sister Rhea. Indeed, marital unions between siblings were apparently customary among the Titans, and she was already enceinte with their inaugural child. Consequently, Cronus devised a stratagem that was simultaneously starkly simple and utterly monstrous. He would permit the children to be born, and then he would consume them. Envision the dreadful tableau when their firstborn, a daughter christened Hestia, entered the world. Rhea, utterly spent from the arduous labour of childbirth, yet radiating the profound elation of a new mother, cradled her infant close, gazing with a loving smile upon the minuscule, flawless countenance. She likely envisioned all the wondrous knowledge she would impart to her daughter, all the enchanting locales they would explore together, all the boundless affection they would share. Then Cronus strode into the chamber. "Give me the child," he commanded, his deep, resonant Titan voice rumbling through the space. Rhea must have innocently presumed he wished to embrace his daughter, to extend a paternal blessing and welcome her into the world. Instead, Cronus grasped the infant in his colossal hands, opened his maw to an impossibly vast extent, and swallowed tiny Hestia in a single horrifying gulp. Can one truly fathom Rhea's unadulterated terror? Can one conjure the image of her anguished screams, her frantic, futile efforts to intervene, her utter inability to comprehend the motivation behind her husband's monstrous act? But Cronus merely wiped his mouth and departed, content in the conviction that he had neutralized at least one potential menace to his royal dominion. The truly heart-wrenching aspect is that this was no isolated incident of temporary insanity. When their second child was born, a daughter named Demeter, the same chilling event transpired. Cronus seized the infant and ingested her whole. Then came Hera, their third progeny. She met an identical fate. Subsequently, Hades, their first son, vanished in a solitary swallow. Then Poseidon, their second son, another gulp, another child disappeared into the cavernous depths of their father's gullet. At this juncture, one might reasonably inquire, where precisely did these children go once Cronus had swallowed them? Were they consigned to oblivion? The revelation is both disquieting and, paradoxically, somewhat reassuring, for Cronus was an immortal Titan. His offspring, too, possessed immortality. Thus, when he consumed them, they did not perish. Instead, they found themselves ensnared within his stomach, alive, yet perpetually confined within an expanse of eternal gloom. Imagine for a moment being one of those unfortunate children. You retain consciousness. You possess the capacity for thought. You can discern the presence of your siblings around you in the profound darkness, yet escape remains an impossibility. You are unable to mature. You cannot explore the world beyond. You are condemned to do nothing but await your fate within the warm, constricting obscurity of your father's immense abdomen. Concurrently, Rhea's despair and heartbreak intensified with each successive child. She lost. She implored Cronus to desist from his heinous acts. She attempted to conceal herself when labor commenced. She desperately appealed to other Titans for assistance, but Cronus held absolute sway as king, and all were too petrified of him to intervene. By the time Rhea was pregnant with her sixth child, she recognized that a radically different course of action was imperative. She could not endure the anguish of losing another infant to her husband's insatiable paranoid appetite. Consequently, she conceived a stratagem that was both remarkably ingenious and fraught with immense peril. When the moment arrived for the sixth child to be delivered, Rhea did not return to their opulent palace. Instead, she journeyed a considerable distance to a secluded grotto nestled on the island of Crete. There, enveloped by the supportive presence of benevolent nymphs who helped to dampen the sounds of childbirth, she brought forth a son. She bestowed upon him the name Zeus. However, rather than conveying the infant Zeus back to his father, Rhea meticulously enveloped a substantial stone in swaddling clothes. She ensured that the stone approximated the appropriate dimensions and mass of a newborn. She even adorned it with a tiny cap, so that from a distance it would convincingly resemble a genuine infant. Subsequently, she returned home and presented this fabricated baby to Cronus. One would naturally assume that a father would possess the discernment to differentiate between an actual infant and a mere rock enshrouded in blankets. Yet, it is crucial to recall that Cronus harboured no desire whatsoever to be a father. His singular focus was so intensely fixed on eradicating potential threats to his authority that he never deigned to actually scrutinize his children before devouring them. Thus, when Rhea tendered the bundled item to him, Cronus accepted it without any genuine examination and ingested the stone whole, precisely as he had consumed his 5 preceding children. Meanwhile, the infant Zeus remained sequestered within the cavern on Crete, where he was nurtured by the devoted nymphs and sustained by a diet of sweet honey and the nourishing milk of a magical goat named Amalthea. With each passing day he grew progressively larger and more formidable, and with each passing day Rhea visited him in clandestine fashion, recounting tales of his siblings imprisoned within their father's gargantuan stomach. As Zeus matured from a helpless babe into a vigorous young man, he assimilated the narrative of his father's profound terror and the atrocious deeds that this fear had compelled him to commit, and gradually Zeus commenced to meticulously orchestrate his vengeance. However, what renders this particular narrative exceptionally compelling is this: Zeus was not merely contemplating the punishment of his father for his inherent cruelty. He was also meticulously planning the liberation of his brothers and sisters. In stark contrast to Cronus, who perceived his offspring solely as existential threats, Zeus regarded them as integral family members who rightfully deserved their freedom. The profound question that preoccupied Zeus as he formulated his intricate schemes was this: was he inexorably fated to mirror the tyrannical nature of his father? Would the act of overthrowing Cronus merely transform him into another ruthless sovereign, destined to succumb to fear and annihilate his own progeny someday? Or could he decisively sever the vicious cycle of violence that had been transmitted from Uranus to Cronus, and now perilously threatened to perpetuate itself through him? What indeed compels an individual to perceive their own children as adversaries? Is it solely the fear of relinquishing power? Or does a deeper, more intrinsic failing exist? Some fundamental incapacity to prioritize the affection for others above one's own sense of security? Speaking of these inescapable cycles of violence and their often unforeseen repercussions, our subsequent narrative commences with one of the most exquisitely beautiful outcomes imaginable, one that paradoxically emerges from one of the most brutal acts chronicled in all of ancient mythology. It is as if the ancient Greeks sought to convey a profound truth. Even the most terrible events can be the genesis of something truly magnificent. Do you recall how Cronus violently deposed his father Uranus using that formidable curved blade? Well, the ancient mythographers possessed exceptionally precise notions regarding what transpired following that moment of savage violence. They believed that when Uranus was grievously wounded, droplets of his immortal ichor cascaded into the vast expanse of the sea, and from that divine blood, commingling with the effervescent foam and the briny waters of the ocean, something utterly miraculous began to materialize. Visualize the unfolding scene. The tranquil Mediterranean Sea on a morning so utterly serene that its surface appeared like a sheet of polished obsidian. The nascent sun was just beginning its ascent, suffusing the heavens with tender hues of rose and burnished gold. Gentle ripples caressed the shoreline, bearing with them the customary treasures that the ocean graciously yields, fragments of smooth, iridescent sea glass, intriguing conch shells, and tangled skeins of seaweed. Yet, on this specific morning, the waves were conveying something unprecedented, something utterly novel. Initially it resembled ordinary sea foam, the frothy, white effervescence that forms when ocean waves crash against rugged rocks. But this particular foam was distinct. It emitted a soft, luminous glow, akin to the pearlescent sheen of a precious gem. It did not dissipate like conventional foam. Instead, it expanded in size and intensified in radiance as it drifted inexorably towards the shore. And then, slowly, with an ethereal grace, a figure began to ascend from within the heart of the glowing foam. This, then, was Aphrodite, the resplendent goddess of love and unparalleled beauty, being born directly from the very essence of the sea itself. Now, the ancient Greeks harboured profoundly specific and exalted conceptions regarding the epitome of beauty in all existence. Aphrodite, in their profound understanding, transcended mere prettiness. She embodied the very essence of pulchritude made manifest in divine form. Her hair, a cascade of radiant strands, captured the nascent glow of the morning sun, appearing as if meticulously spun from pure gold. Her skin possessed an unparalleled smoothness, akin to the flawless surface of a lustrous pearl. Her eyes, meanwhile, mirrored the profound azure of the deep ocean on a serenely warm summer's day, holding within them the vastness of the sea. Yet her allure extended far beyond her exquisite physical attributes. There was an ineffable quality to Aphrodite's pervasive presence that imbued everything within her vicinity with an amplified sense of loveliness. The frothy sea foam that gently embraced her sparkled with the dazzling brilliance of countless diamonds. The unassuming seashells scattered at her feet were suddenly transformed, glistening as if they were precious, rare jewels. Even the gulls, soaring high above, seemed to execute their aerial dances with a more profound and effortless grace whenever she drew near. As the goddess Aphrodite graced the shore with her initial steps, a miraculous transformation unfolded beneath her feet. Delicate blossoms erupted in her footprints. These were no ordinary blooms, but resplendent roses, the most exquisite and intensely fragrant roses ever witnessed by mortal or immortal eyes. The very earth itself appeared to hum with joyous celebration at her momentous arrival. However, a particularly intriguing aspect of this seminal moment lies in Aphrodite's unique genesis. She was born fully mature, possessing an inherent and complete understanding of her identity and the full scope of her burgeoning powers. Unlike the gradual development of mortal infants, who must painstakingly acquire knowledge from scratch, she instantly comprehended her divine status and recognized that her sacred dominion encompassed love in all its intricate and varied expressions. And love, as Aphrodite would swiftly discern, was a far more labyrinthine and complex phenomenon than simply eliciting feelings of happiness in others. The first profound observation she made concerned the immediate and pervasive impact of her presence upon the myriad creatures surrounding her. A graceful pair of dolphins who had been leisurely navigating the coastal waters suddenly commenced an elaborate and mesmerizing courtship ballet, leaping and spinning through the waves with astonishing synchronization and fluid precision. Two seagulls, previously locked in a contentious dispute over a morsel of fish, abruptly abandoned their squabble and began tenderly preening each other's feathers with newfound affection. Even the silent flora responded to her potent influence. Vines that had been independently stretching in divergent directions spontaneously began to intertwine, their tendrils seeking mutual embrace. Solitary trees standing in proud isolation subtly inclined their branches towards their neighbours, as if yearning for camaraderie and connection. But Aphrodite's heightened senses also perceived another, more subtle undercurrent, the pervasive sense of solitude that permeated the entirety of the world. In the boundless ocean stretching behind her, she could acutely feel the profound isolation of myriad creatures navigating the vast, unpeopled depths alone. On the verdant land ahead, she sensed the quiet yearning of animals and ethereal spirits who had never experienced the profound solace of genuine companionship. And most remarkably, she could discern the intricate emotional landscapes of her fellow gods, despite having never encountered them in person. Somewhere in the distant reaches, she perceived Zeus's convoluted sentiments concerning the burdens of power and the weight of responsibility. She felt Hera's perpetual struggle, a tumultuous interplay between her profound love and consuming jealousy. She even detected the poignant loneliness of Artemis, who, despite her deliberate choice of solitude, occasionally harboured a wistful curiosity about what she might be forsaking. It was at this pivotal juncture that Aphrodite made a momentous decision, one destined to shape the destinies of both gods and mortals for all eternity. She resolved that her divine purpose would not merely be to symbolize love, but to proactively cultivate and create fertile ground for love to blossom and flourish. She initiated her grand endeavor on a modest scale, beginning with the creatures immediately within her grasp. She gently encouraged the dolphins to seek out partners, fostering deeper bonds. She assiduously aided the solitary seabirds in their quest for suitable mates. She even subtly influenced the ocean currents, orchestrating the convergence of fish that had previously navigated the vast waters in isolation. However, as she traversed the shoreline, diligently exploring this nascent world into which she had been born, Aphrodite began to grasp that love was not invariably a straightforward blessing. She observed a pair of crabs engaged in a fierce, territorial skirmish, a realization dawning upon her that sometimes the fervent desire to safeguard that which one cherishes could inexorably lead to bitter conflict. She witnessed a mother bird aggressively repelling other avian creatures who ventured too close to her meticulously constructed nest, thereby comprehending that love frequently encompassed elements of possessiveness and an inherent jealousy. Most surprisingly, she discovered that her very existence, her divine presence, could inadvertently precipitate complications. When she happened upon a group of juvenile dolphins, they were instantly captivated by her, abandoning their existing relationships and diligently following her along the shore, utterly infatuated. She was compelled to learn the critical art of modulating her profound influence, to wield it with thoughtful deliberation rather than permitting it to indiscriminately affect everyone and everything in her vicinity. This profound realization marked Aphrodite's inaugural lesson in the immense responsibility that accompanied her extraordinary powers. Being the revered goddess of love did not simply entail orchestrating universal infatuation. It demanded a nuanced understanding of the delicate equilibrium between desire and respect, between unbridled passion and profound wisdom, between uniting individuals and honoring their intrinsic right to forge their own unique paths. As the sun ascended higher in the cerulean sky, Aphrodite recognized the imperative to ascertain her rightful position among the other deities. She had been born with the inherent knowledge that beings akin to her existed, immortal entities possessing their own distinct domains and individualistic temperaments. Yet, she also intuitively understood that her arrival would irrevocably alter the intricate dynamics of their established relationships in ways that no one could possibly foresee. After all, what profound transformations ensue when the goddess of love makes her entrance into a divine family, already replete with its own significant share of convoluted interpersonal affairs. What ramifications arise when an entity endowed with the power to sway emotions joins an assembly of immensely potent beings who frequently struggle with the mastery of their own tumultuous feelings? Aphrodite stood poised at the very edge of the water, her gaze sweeping across the boundless sea that had served as her birthplace, then turning to survey the expansive land where her new existence beckoned. The gentle breeze playfully tousled her golden hair, and roses continued to burgeon spontaneously around her feet, a testament to her divine essence. She was unequivocally beautiful, immensely powerful, and eternally immortal. Yet, in a profound and singular sense, she was utterly alone. She was the sole entity of her kind, the singular being whose very essence was the embodiment of love itself. How does one cultivate authentic relationships when one's mere presence automatically sways the sentiments of others towards oneself? How can one truly ascertain if another's affection is genuine or simply a reactive response to one's inherent divine nature? These were the weighty questions that Aphrodite carried within her as she embarked upon her initial steps away from the ocean and towards the majestic Mount Olympus, where the other gods awaited, unknowingly anticipating the arrival of love incarnate. And perhaps these are precisely the same profound questions that humanity continues to grapple with in the contemporary era. How do we harmoniously balance the innate yearning to be loved with the fundamental necessity to remain authentic to ourselves? How do we definitively discern when our emotions for another are truly genuine, and when they are merely a superficial reaction to outward attractions? How do we extend love to others while steadfastly preserving our own distinct identity? These introspective inquiries concerning identity and authenticity serve as a poignant transition point, leading us directly to one of the most terrifying and formidable challenges Zeus ever confronted, a monumental battle that rigorously tested not merely his prodigious strength, but his very inherent right to preside over the entire cosmos. For sometimes the gravest threats emanate not from familial perfidy or intricate romantic entanglements, but from forces of unadulterated chaotic destruction. By this epoch, Zeus had successfully orchestrated the overthrow of his tyrannical father, Cronus, liberated his siblings from their grim incarceration within their father's stomach, and firmly established himself as the supreme monarch of the gods upon the lofty heights of Mount Olympus. One might reasonably assume that this period would present an opportune moment for Zeus to recline and savour the fruits of his hard-won victory. Instead, it was precisely at this juncture that the earth herself, the venerable Gaia, decided to put Zeus's claim to the throne to the ultimate test. You see, Gaia, the primordial earth goddess, had stoically witnessed her children and grandchildren engaged in relentless internecine warfare for untold generations. Initially, Uranus had demonstrated egregious cruelty towards his offspring. Subsequently, Cronus had violently deposed Uranus. Now, Zeus had just as violently overthrown Cronus. Gaia was utterly weary of this unending cycle of familial brutality, and she was particularly incensed by Zeus's decision to imprison many of her other children, the formidable Titans, within the deepest, most abyssal pit of the underworld. Consequently, Gaia resolved to forge a champion capable of vanquishing Zeus once and for all. Her intention was not to install this champion as a replacement ruler, but rather to definitively terminate the perpetual cycle of violent power struggles by utterly obliterating the very concept of divine kingship. She retreated to the most profound and secret caverns nestled deep beneath the earth's surface, where the primordial rock remained in a molten state, and the very air shimmered with an intense, infernal heat. There, within a vast subterranean chamber, illuminated solely by the eerie glow of subterranean lava streams, Gaia commenced her most ambitious and terrifying creation to date. She meticulously gathered clay from the deepest, most inaccessible ocean trenches, blended it with raw, elemental fire extracted from the earth's fiery core, and then infused it with the entirety of her incandescent rage, her profound frustration, and her fervent desire for an absolute end to divine tyranny. What emerged from this terrifying alchemical process was an entity unlike anything that had ever existed before, and hopefully something that would never again grace existence. His name was Typhon, and he was meticulously engineered to be the perfect anti-god. Envision the most colossal mountain you have ever laid eyes upon. Now imagine that immense geological formation possessed the capacity to move, to think, and to harbour an unyielding, malevolent hatred. Typhon was so staggeringly tall that when he stood erect, his monstrous head scraped against the distant stars. His eyes blazed with the ferocity of miniature, incandescent suns. Instead of conventional hair, a writhing mass of venomous serpents covered his scalp, each one possessing enough deadly poison to fell 100 mortals with a single, excruciating bite. But perhaps the most horrifying aspect of his appearance were his hands. From his elbows downwards, in place of conventional arms and hands, Typhon possessed 100 fearsome dragon heads. Each individual head was capable of unleashing a distinct and devastating form of destruction. Some exhaled searing fire, others spewed noxious poison gas, while still others exhaled a freezing gale that could instantly transform living creatures into solid ice. When Typhon first tore himself from the earth's crust, his mere act of rising to his full height triggered cataclysmic earthquakes that convulsed across the entire known world. His thunderous roar, which emanated not only from his primary mouth, but from all 100 of his dragon-headed hands, was of such immense volume that it shattered formidable mountains and precipitated avalanches thousands of miles away. The first moment the gods residing on Mount Olympus caught sight of Typhon's terrifying approach, their immediate reaction was not to valiantly stand their ground and engage in battle. Instead, it was to flee in unadulterated terror, as swiftly as their divine forms would permit. And it is crucial to remember that we are speaking of the very same gods who had successfully waged war against the formidable Titans, who commanded lightning bolts and earthquakes, and who held dominion over the underworld itself. But Typhon was an entity of an entirely different magnitude. He was not merely powerful, He was chaos incarnate, destruction pursued for its own sake, the very harbinger of the absolute end of everything they had painstakingly constructed. In a dramatic exodus, the revered Olympian deities, seized by an overwhelming terror, sought refuge in the ancient lands of Egypt. There they ingeniously adopted animal forms, hoping to evade the relentless penetrating scrutiny of the monstrous Typhon. The goddess Aphrodite, renowned for her beauty, transformed into a sleek fish, vanishing into the watery depths. Apollo, the radiant god of music and light, assumed the guise of a watchful crow. Artemis, the huntress, became a lithe and secretive cat. Even the formidable Ares, the very embodiment of martial prowess, abandoned his divine form, metamorphosing into a fierce boar and seeking concealment in the most remote reaches of the vast Nile Delta. Yet, amidst this widespread panic and flight, Zeus, the sovereign lord of the heavens, remained steadfast. His decision to stay was not born of an absence of dread. Indeed, the ancient narratives vividly portray him as utterly petrified by Typhon's impending arrival. Rather, his resolve stemmed from a profound realization that eluded his fellow immortals. He grasped that capitulating in this monumental confrontation, allowing Typhon to lay waste to their sacred abode on Mount Olympus and dismantle the entire edifice of their divine civilization, would signify Gaia's ultimate victory. Such an outcome would herald the demise of the god's dominion, plunging the cosmos back into a state of primordial, unbridled chaos. Consequently, Zeus positioned himself solitary upon the loftiest summit of Mount Olympus, his formidable thunderbolts crackling with raw energy in his grip, patiently awaiting the colossal adversary's inevitable approach. When the titanic clash finally commenced, it unfolded with an intensity and scale utterly unprecedented in the annals of existence. Zeus, with unparalleled fury, unleashed a relentless barrage of incandescent lightning bolts at Typhon. Each fiery projectile possessed a blinding brilliance capable of instantly incapacitating mortal vision, and a deafening roar that reverberated across the vast expanse of the world. Yet the colossal Typhon appeared remarkably impervious. While these potent electrical discharges seared indelible scorch marks upon his craggy, rock-like hide, they failed to impede his relentless advance or diminish his terrifying momentum. Simultaneously, Typhon retaliated with a terrifying symphony of destruction, his 100 serpentine dragon heads spewing forth a diverse array of ruinous forces. One head belched forth flames so intensely hot they could liquefy solid bronze. Another exhaled a virulent poison that caused vegetation to shrivel and die for countless miles, while others unleashed an Arctic blast so frigid it could crystallize the very atmosphere. Zeus, facing this overwhelming onslaught, was compelled to exert every ounce of his legendary speed and divine agility merely to evade complete annihilation within the opening moments of the engagement. The epic confrontation persisted with unyielding ferocity, stretching from the passage of mere days into the relentless progression of weeks. The ceaseless resonant peals of Zeus's formidable lightning, coupled with the guttural, earth-shaking roars emanating from Typhon's numerous heads, conspired to conjure cataclysmic storms that inundated and submerged entire geographical regions. The intense, radiating heat generated by their colossal struggle was sufficient to liquefy the ancient snow-caps adorning mountains far removed from the immediate conflict zone. Under the sheer, unadulterated force of their impacts, the very crust of the earth groaned, fracturing and rending open. Yet, amidst this prolonged and devastating exchange, a crucial understanding began to dawn upon Zeus. Victory against such an adversary could not be secured through brute force in isolation. Typhon, he discerned, was simply too immensely powerful, too extraordinarily resilient, and too thoroughly imbued with an inexhaustible reservoir of destructive vitality. Each instance where Zeus believed he had finally seized a tactical upper hand, Typhon would unleash a novel and devastating form of assault, invariably compelling the king of the gods to retreat onto the defensive. It was at this critical juncture that Zeus's mind hearkened back to an ancient piece of wisdom imparted by his venerable grandmother Gaia, long before their relationship had soured into enmity. She had once sagely pronounced that the very earth itself was the ultimate wellspring of formidable power, yet simultaneously this same terrestrial force possessed the capacity to be wielded against those who harboured intentions of destruction rather than guardianship. Consequently, instead of persisting in his futile attempts to obliterate Typhon directly, Zeus ingeniously adopted an entirely novel approach. He initiated the deployment of his formidable lightning not as instruments of direct combat, but rather as precision tools for manipulation. He began to strike the ground in the immediate vicinity of Typhon, deliberately avoiding direct impacts on the monster. His new objective was to instigate colossal rock slides and cascading avalanches. Initially, this revised tactic appeared utterly ineffectual. Typhon, with contemptuous ease, merely cleaved through the torrent of falling rocks as if they were insignificant pebbles. However, Zeus persevered with unwavering determination, continuously unleashing strikes, persistently engineering landslides, and steadily amassing stone upon stone. Through this relentless and patient effort, the rocky debris began, with imperceptible slowness, to accumulate around Typhon's massive feet. The arduous task demanded yet another full week of unremitting, concentrated lightning strikes from Zeus, but his persistent efforts ultimately bore fruit. He succeeded in entombing Typhon, now immobile up to his waist in a formidable mound of loose rock and geological debris. Despite this partial containment, the monstrous entity remained fiercely combative, its multitudinous dragon heads continuing to spew forth their destructive emanations. Yet its colossal form was now irrevocably anchored, stripped of its terrifying mobility. It was at this critical juncture that Zeus executed his final, audacious gambit. Recognizing the potential futility or even impossibility of outright slaying Typhon, he instead harnessed his profound dominion over seismic forces. With immense power, he caused the very earth to cleave open in a gaping chasm directly beneath the interred monster. Then, with a singular, cataclysmic lightning strike, a discharge of energy surpassing any he had ever previously conjured, he brought down an entire towering mountain, collapsing its immense mass directly upon Typhon. The colossal geological formation that ultimately entombed Typhon was none other than the iconic Mount Etna. As recounted by the sagas of the ancient Greeks, the monstrous entity remains perpetually incarcerated beneath its immense weight. They posited that each time the formidable volcano rumbles to life and erupts with fiery fury, it serves as a testament to Typhon's enduring presence below, his rage unquenched, his breath still a torrent of fire, and his colossal form perpetually striving for liberation. However, what renders this narrative particularly compelling is the profound insight embedded within its conclusion. Zeus did not achieve triumph over Typhon through a mere demonstration of superior physical might. Rather, his victory was forged through astute intellect and sagacious planning. He prevailed by exercising profound patience instead of relying solely on raw power, by engaging in strategic contemplation rather than simply intensifying his efforts in direct combat. When the other Olympian deities eventually ventured back from their Egyptian sanctuary, discovering Zeus standing weary but undeniably triumphant amidst the desolation of the battlefield, they posed an inevitable question. How had he possibly vanquished a foe that had instilled such paralyzing terror in all of them? Zeus's response was remarkably succinct, yet deeply resonant. My victory was not achieved through greater strength. I defeated him by remembering the fundamental cause for which I fought. This profound lesson perhaps resonates far beyond the confines of ancient mythological tales. It suggests that occasionally the most formidable obstacles we encounter in our own existences cannot be surmounted by simply redoubling our efforts or by striving to be physically more dominant. Instead, such challenges often necessitate a deliberate pause, a period of meticulous reflection, and a conscious recollection of what truly holds paramount significance in our hearts and minds. The profound concept of recalling one's core motivations and ultimate purpose in a struggle seamlessly transitions our focus to the narrative of one of the most celebrated heroes in the entire pantheon of Greek mythology. This forthcoming tale vividly illustrates how, on occasion, the most pivotal conflicts are waged not against monstrous beings themselves, but rather against the insidious societal structures and entrenched systems that are responsible for their very creation. Let us now journey from the ethereal domain of the immortal gods, descending into the tangible world of mortals, to the captivating and sun-drenched island of Crete. Here the illustrious King Minos held sway, his reign characterized by sagacious governance, immense material prosperity, and a deeply guarded, horrifying secret concealed beneath the very foundations of his grand palace. This clandestine truth was embodied by the structure known as the labyrinth, an architectural marvel and simultaneously the most intricate and bewildering maze ever conceived by human ingenuity. It was the brainchild of the legendary master craftsman Daedalus, a sprawling subterranean network comprised of an endless convolution of winding corridors, deceptive dead ends, and cunningly designed false passages, so disorienting in its complexity that any unfortunate soul who dared to trespass within its confines would inevitably become hopelessly disoriented and lost within mere minutes. And at the very heart of this formidable labyrinth dwelled an anomaly, a creature that, by all rights, should never have been brought into existence, the fearsome Minotaur. Indeed, the very genesis of the Minotaur was a poignant saga, a profound tragedy born from the confluence of divine retribution and the unforeseen repercussions of human actions. King Minos, in a moment of hubris or oversight, had once incurred the wrath of the formidable sea god Poseidon. In a chilling act of vengeance, Poseidon orchestrated a cruel curse, compelling Minos, as royal consort, to develop an unnatural and consuming passion for a magnificent, sacred bull. From this abhorrent and unnatural coupling emerged the Minotaur, a creature of unsettling duality. It possessed the robust physique of a powerful human male, yet was crowned with the formidable head of a bull. Endowed with a keen, albeit twisted human intelligence, it was nonetheless inexorably driven by the insatiable primal urges of a ravenous beast. Overwhelmed by profound shame and an abiding horror at this grotesque embodiment of his family's divine curse, King Minos had subsequently commissioned the ingenious Daedalus to construct the labyrinthine prison. This elaborate structure was designed to perpetually confine the creature, ensuring that the Minotaur, though it could never escape its dark confines, was also condemned to an existence without end, without the solace of peace, forever destined to remain nothing more than a tormented monster trapped within an abyss of eternal gloom. Yet the narrative takes an even more heart-wrenching turn, deepening into a profound tragedy. In order to satiate the monstrous hunger of the Minotaur, King Minos had cruelly levied an abominable tribute upon the venerable city-state of Athens. With a chilling regularity, every 7 years Athens was compelled by force to dispatch 7 of its vibrant young men and an equal number of its promising young women to the distant shores of Crete. Upon arrival, these unfortunate youths would be unceremoniously thrust into the bewildering depths of the labyrinth, destined to be relentlessly hunted down and ultimately devoured by the ravenous Minotaur. One can scarcely fathom the devastating psychological and emotional toll this brutal decree exacted upon Athenian families. Every 7 years, a staggering 14 households were condemned to suffer the unspeakable anguish of losing their cherished offspring to this horrific and inescapable destiny. The selection of these victims was determined by a pitiless lottery system, a cruel mechanism that ensured every family possessing young members lived under the perpetual, gnawing shadow of fear, haunted by the dreadful possibility that their own son or daughter might be arbitrarily chosen as the next sacrifice. It was precisely into this entrenched and horrifying predicament that our burgeoning hero Theseus resolutely made his entrance. Though he was, in fact, the legitimate son of King Aegeus of Athens, Theseus had spent his formative years far removed from the opulent confines of the royal palace, having been lovingly nurtured by his mother in the tranquil setting of a modest coastal town. He had only recently journeyed to Athens, and upon his arrival had discovered the profound truth of his noble royal lineage. Consequently, when the sombre occasion arose for the 3rd installment of the gruesome tribute to be dispatched to Crete, Theseus bore witness to this profound tragedy for the very first time. He observed with a heavy heart as the 14 youthful Athenians were selected through the impersonal mechanism of the lottery. He saw the heart-rending tears streaming down the faces of their grief-stricken families, and he recognized the profound, resigned despair mirrored in the vacant eyes of the chosen victims themselves. He listened intently as the elder citizens, steeped in years of resignation, elucidated that this lamentable state of affairs was simply an unalterable reality, asserting that any attempt to resist King Minos and his terrifying beast would prove utterly futile. However, Theseus, still imbued with the vibrant idealism of youth, and as yet unburdened by the crushing weight of years spent acquiescing to the intolerable, posed a deceptively straightforward query: why do we not simply decline to dispatch this abhorrent tribute? The grim response, he soon ascertained, was rooted in the overwhelming might of King Minos's formidable navy. Should Athens dare to defy the decree and withhold the tribute, Minos would, without hesitation, launch a full-scale invasion, culminating in the complete obliteration of the city. The prevailing grim rationale dictated that it was a lesser evil to sacrifice 14 young lives every 7 years than to jeopardize the very existence of the entire populace. This cold, pragmatic calculus, however, failed utterly to placate Theseus's sense of justice. Instead, with a resolute conviction that stunned all present, including his own royal father, King Aegeus, he made a momentous announcement. He declared his intention to volunteer himself as one of the 14 fated tributes, vowing unequivocally that he would personally slay the Minotaur. King Aegeus, naturally, was utterly aghast. Having only recently experienced the joyous reunion with his long-lost son, the prospect of Theseus willingly squandering his precious life on what appeared to be an utterly impossible undertaking was profoundly distressing. Over the preceding years, scores of young individuals had been consigned to the treacherous depths of the labyrinth, and not a single one had ever re-emerged from its bewildering confines. A significant number of these doomed youths had been highly skilled and extensively trained warriors. What then? Instilled in Theseus the conviction that he could achieve success where all others had met with ignominious failure. Theseus's calm and insightful reply illuminated a crucial facet of his remarkable character. He declared, "While I may not possess the absolute certainty of slaying the Minotaur, I can, with unwavering resolve, ensure that I am the very last person to perish in the attempt." This statement underscored that Theseus possessed a meticulously conceived plan, one that extended far beyond the simplistic objective of merely engaging the monstrous creature in combat. He had diligently immersed himself in every known detail concerning the labyrinth, engaging in extensive conversations with Daedalus's former apprentices, thereby acquiring an intimate understanding of its intricate construction and bewildering layout. His conviction was that the true, formidable challenge lay not in the confrontation with the Minotaur itself, but rather in the seemingly insurmountable task of successfully navigating an escape from the convoluted maze thereafter. Thus, when the sombre vessel bearing the 14 tributes finally docked on the shores of Crete, Theseus carried not merely the conventional implements of warfare secreted amongst his belongings. He held a simple yet profoundly significant ball of thread. Yet, prior to delving into the renowned stratagem of the thread, an equally pivotal, though frequently neglected segment of this epic narrative unfolds. As Theseus meticulously readying himself for his imminent encounter with the formidable Minotaur, his resolute demeanour drew the unexpected gaze of Ariadne, the illustrious daughter of King Minos. Ariadne, from her earliest recollections, had been acutely aware of the monstrous Minotaur, the brutal tribute exacted, and the tragic procession of young individuals who vanished within the labyrinthine depths every 7 years. However, she had never before personally encountered any of these ill-fated victims. They were consistently sequestered from the royal family, their treatment akin to that of sacrificial beasts destined for slaughter rather than as sentient human beings. Her meeting with Theseus irrevocably altered this detached perspective. For the very first time, she found herself in direct proximity to an individual poised to become sustenance for her family's grotesque creature. Crucially, unlike his predecessors, Theseus was not acquiescent to his grim destiny. Instead, he harboured a fierce resolve to resist and retaliate. This profound ethical quandary precipitated a significant internal struggle for Ariadne. She possessed the means to preserve Theseus's life by assisting him in traversing the intricate windings of the labyrinth. Yet, such an act would entail committing an act of disloyalty against her formidable father and potentially imperiling her own family, should King Minos ever unearth her daring deception. Ultimately, Ariadne reached a decision that would irrevocably shape her future trajectory. She concluded that certain societal constructs and inherent cruelties were simply too abhorrent to countenance, even if active resistance against them necessitated the forfeiture of every comfort and familiarity she had ever known. In the hushed hours of the night preceding Theseus's fated entry into the labyrinth, Ariadne clandestinely sought him out in his desolate cell. She presented him with a most extraordinary gift, one originally bestowed upon her by the ingenious artificer Daedalus himself, an enchanted spool of twine. This wondrous thread possessed the inherent property of always guiding its user back to its initial anchor point, regardless of how extensively it was unfurled within the bewildering confines of the maze. "Secure one extremity to the entrance," she softly imparted, her voice a mere whisper. "Permit it to unravel as you penetrate deeper into the labyrinthine passages. Once the monstrous entity has been vanquished, simply retrace the thread's path to reclaim your liberty." Beyond this invaluable artifact, she also furnished him with something equally vital: intimate insights into the Minotaur's peculiar habits, knowledge attainable only by someone raised within the very walls of the royal palace. She revealed that the formidable creature attained its peak strength during the daylight hours, yet became noticeably lethargic as night descended. Furthermore, while its vision was severely impaired, it compensated with an exceptionally acute olfactory prowess. Though intelligent enough to devise cunning traps, its inherent pride was such that direct provocations would compel it to forsake strategic maneuvers for raw, unbridled brute force. As the dawn broke the following morning, Theseus stepped into the formidable labyrinth, laden not only with Ariadne's precious thread and her invaluable strategic intelligence, but also burdened with the collective aspirations of every soul who had ever suffered loss under King Minos's merciless dominion. The labyrinthine structure proved to be even more bewildering and psychologically taxing than he had anticipated. Its towering walls were adorned with intricate etchings of false doors and deceptive insignia, designed to confound and mislead. The sinuous corridors twisted, branched, and doubled back upon themselves in configurations that utterly challenged all rational comprehension. Despite possessing the magical thread intended to ensure his return, Theseus occasionally found himself disoriented, uncertain of his precise bearing within the immense puzzle. Nevertheless, he persevered, pushing ever deeper into the heart of the maze, guided by the subtle, resonant sound of the Minotaur's breathing and the increasingly pungent aroma of ancient bones and palpable dread. Upon finally attaining the very nucleus of the labyrinth, Theseus emerged into a vast rotunda, illuminated by a solitary column of ethereal light, descending from a distant aperture high above. There, reposing beside a chilling mound of human bones, lay the Minotaur. Its physical stature was less colossal than Theseus had imagined, yet it possessed an unexpected humanity in its form. The creature's physique was undeniably that of a powerful man, bearing the indelible marks of countless skirmishes and a life of brutal confinement, yet still exhibiting an unsettling fluidity of motion even in slumber. Only its head was singularly grotesque, a prodigious bull's head, crowned with horns honed to a lethal sharpness, capable of effortlessly piercing even the most robust bronze armour. For a fleeting moment, Theseus paused, his resolve wavering. He perceived that this entity was not merely a monstrous beast, it was also, in its own tragic way, a victim, a creature that had never exercised agency in its own creation, eternally confined within the oppressive darkness and sustained by the forced sacrifice of innocence. However, the vivid memory of all the young lives extinguished within this very chamber surged through Theseus's mind, and he understood with chilling clarity that extending clemency to the Minotaur would inexorably lead to the perpetuated demise of countless future innocents. The ensuing confrontation, though surprisingly swift in its conclusion, was by no means devoid of immense difficulty. The Minotaur engaged with the ferocious despair of a being that had been imprisoned for an eternity. Yet Theseus countered with the unwavering resolve of an individual who bore the collective hopes of every soul ever sacrificed to uphold an inherently unjust system. Once the arduous struggle had concluded, Theseus meticulously retraced his steps, guided by Ariadne's luminous thread, back through the labyrinth's convoluted corridors to its gaping entrance. Trailing behind him, he ushered forth the remaining 13 Athenian tributes, who had been huddled near the egress, clinging to the faintest glimmer of expectation, scarcely daring to believe that salvation was within reach. However, the saga of Theseus does not culminate merely with his triumphant escape from the island of Crete, for the slaying of the monstrous Minotaur represented only the nascent phase of fundamentally altering the oppressive system that had, in fact, engendered the creature's very existence. And herein perhaps lies the profoundest insight of this ancient narrative. True courage at times transcends the valour of confronting a tangible beast. It resides, rather, in undertaking the arduous labour of constructing a societal framework where such horrific entities are rendered utterly superfluous. Envision, if you will, for a fleeting instant, the most unprecedented cephalalgia in the annals of cosmic history. One awakens with the profound conviction that one's cranium might cleave asunder. Yet, when one is Zeus, the sovereign ruler of the Olympian pantheon, such somatic discomforts are invariably far from ordinary. This fateful dawn upon the majestic heights of Mount Olympus commenced with the customary celestial rhythm. Helios, the venerable sun god, had just begun to pilot his fiery chariot across the azure expanse, suffusing the palatial marble columns of the grand edifice in a gentle, golden radiance. Zeus, meanwhile, had been traversing the opulent halls of his divine abode, one powerful hand pressed firmly against his throbbing forehead, striving to comprehend this truly unsettling affliction that had been steadily intensifying for several consecutive days. Indeed, several months prior, Zeus had been burdened by an ominous prognostication. The Fates, those primordial sisters who meticulously interwove the intricate tapestries of destiny, had imparted a whisper that managed to arrest the attention of even the formidable Lord of Thunder. They had foretold that Meti, his inaugural consort and the revered goddess of wisdom, was destined to conceive and bear a child who would, in due course, usurp his dominion, mirroring Zeus's own ascendancy over his father, Cronus. Zeus, embodying his characteristic temperament, had undertaken what appeared, at that juncture, to be a rational course of action, though it now strikes us as profoundly peculiar. He had, with decisive intent, ingested Metis entirely, presuming this drastic measure would avert the foretold destiny. However, wisdom, as subsequent events would unequivocally demonstrate, is not so readily suppressed. Even within the very being of Zeus, Metis continued to nurture their nascent offspring, and that remarkable child persisted in its development, absorbing knowledge and flourishing within the confines of the most singularly unconventional gestational chamber imaginable. For many months thereafter, Zeus experienced the distinct sensation of the child stirring, cogitating, and even fashioning intricate objects within the confines of his own skull. One might well ponder the peculiar sensation of having an internal atelier operating within one's cranium. The rhythmic cadence of tiny hammers striking metal resonated ceaselessly within Zeus's consciousness day and night. The nascent deity, it appeared, was already industriously engaged, already creating, already meticulously preparing for its imminent emergence into the external world. This particular morning, however, the escalating sensation had become utterly insufferable. Zeus, therefore, summoned Hephaestus, the skilled god of fire and metalwork, who was, moreover, his own progeny. Hephaestus arrived at the resplendent palace, his formidable bronze axe still imbued with the heat of the smithy, his powerful arms streaked with the vestiges of his labour, perplexed as to why his divine father had demanded his immediate presence with such pressing haste. "My head," Zeus uttered succinctly, and in that singular declaration Hephaestus comprehended, implicitly, divine beings possess an innate faculty for prescience, often grasping profound truths without the necessity of protracted explanations. Indeed, Hephaestus had been anticipating this pivotal moment, having even envisioned it in his meditative reveries within his workshop during those tranquil afternoons when the sole auditory accompaniment was the melodic clangour of hammer upon anvil. They positioned themselves together upon the palace's most elevated eyrie, where the nascent morning air was crisp and pellucid. Far beneath them, the realm of mortals proceeded with its mundane routines. Diligent farmers meticulously inspected their verdant olive groves. Industrious fishermen patiently repaired their intricate fishing tackle, and carefree children engaged in spirited play within sun-dappled, dusty courtyards. None of these earthly inhabitants possessed the slightest inkling that they were unknowingly poised on the precipice of witnessing the spectacular emergence of a goddess. Hephaestus, with a solemnity befitting the moment, raised his formidable axe, and with a single precise and meticulously calibrated strike, he cleaved open Zeus's majestic forehead. What transpired subsequently was so utterly phenomenal that even the other deities, accustomed as they were to myriad strange and miraculous occurrences, abruptly ceased their discussions and gazed in awe-struck astonishment. From within the very skull of Zeus there sprang forth in full maturity a resplendent woman, already clad in a gleaming panoply that appeared to have been forged from the very essence of celestial luminescence. Her magnificent helmet captured the nascent morning sun, reflecting it with blinding effulgence. Her spear was impeccably poised, its shaft perfectly balanced, and her shield was burnished to a flawless, mirror-like sheen. This was Athena, the formidable goddess of wisdom and strategic warfare, brought into existence not as a vulnerable neonate, but as a fully realized entity, instantly prepared to assume her rightful station amidst the Olympian pantheon. Yet, what rendered this moment even more profoundly astonishing was Athena's initial manifestation of agency. It was not to articulate a sound or to initiate movement, but rather to engage in profound cogitation. This intellectual absorption was visibly apparent in her keen, grey eyes, which absorbed every detail of her surroundings with discerning scrutiny. She meticulously scrutinized the structural design of the palace, perceiving the precise spatial arrangement of its majestic pillars and their underlying rationale. She observed the intricate dance of light as it traversed the polished marble floors, instantly comprehending the intricate geometrical principles governing its movement. When she finally deigned to speak, her voice was serene and deliberate. "Father," she addressed Zeus, "I now fully comprehend the purpose of my gestation, nurtured within your divine intellect. The world beyond holds a multitude of tasks awaiting execution." Zeus, gently caressing his miraculously restored brow, beamed with a blend of profound alleviation and paternal satisfaction. What proves profoundly insightful about Athena's miraculous genesis is how perfectly it encapsulates the paramount virtues revered by Hellenic civilization. She was not a product of impetuous emotion or fortuitous circumstance, but rather sprang directly from the very essence of pure thought itself. She manifested in her complete and perfect state because, unlike gradual accumulation, true sagacity does not accrue incrementally. It is instantaneously perfected, poised to confront any impending challenges. In the ensuing days, Athena embarked upon an exploration of Mount Olympus, approaching it with the intellectual avidity of a nascent observer encountering existence for the initial time, yet simultaneously imbued with the profound comprehension of an intellect that had meticulously contemplated it for an extended duration. She sought out Hephaestus in his workshop, where she swiftly assimilated the principles of artisanship and construction. Subsequently, she engaged in discourse with Apollo concerning the realms of music and poetry, perceiving with instantaneous clarity the synergistic interplay of cadence and measure in the generation of aesthetic excellence. Yet it was the bustling realm of mortals below that truly captivated her gaze above all else. From her celestial perch she observed cities grappling with the intricate challenges of self-governance, people striving to resolve complex dilemmas concerning legislative frameworks and administrative structures, and skilled craftspeople diligently striving for mastery in their respective trades. It was here she discerned that her sagacity would prove most invaluable. The inaugural city Athena elected to assist was one destined to subsequently adopt her illustrious appellation, Athens. Its inhabitants were engaged in earnest discourse regarding the optimal structuring of their nascent civic fabric, earnestly seeking to forge equitable resolutions beneficial to all constituents. Athena observed their deliberations with keen fascination, noting how they wrestled with profound inquiries for which facile solutions remained elusive. She materialized before them not in the guise of a formidable, dominating divinity, but rather as an unassuming instructor in the city's vibrant central square. She meticulously imparted the intricate techniques of ceramic artistry, textile fabrication, and the venerated practice of cultivating the olive. These proficiencies were far from arbitrary. Each, in fact, embodied a distinct facet of profound sagacity. The craft of pottery instilled a profound sense of patience and the fundamental comprehension that objects of immense utility and aesthetic appeal could be meticulously fashioned from the most ordinary of earthly materials. The intricate process of weaving illustrated a compelling metaphor, how disparate individual filaments, when skillfully arranged and interlocked, coalesced to form a fabric of far greater resilience and exquisite beauty than any solitary thread could ever achieve. Furthermore, the venerable art of olive cultivation vividly exemplified the paramount importance of strategic, long-term foresight, given that these enduring trees require many years to reach full maturity, yet subsequently bestow their precious bounty of sustenance and vital oil across numerous successive generations. The people of Athens assimilated these profound teachings with remarkable aptitude. They commenced perceiving their polis not merely as an accidental dwelling place, but rather as an evolving entity they possessed the collective agency to mould and enhance through meticulous deliberation and diligent, sustained effort. They instituted innovative governmental structures, pioneered novel methodologies for collective deliberation and policy formulation, and established progressive educational paradigms that prioritized the cultivation of lucid, analytical thought in confronting complex challenges. A particularly noteworthy outcome was the remarkable dissemination of Athena's guiding influence. Neighbouring polities, having become apprised of the enlightened wisdom being actively cultivated within Athens' walls, dispatched emissaries to absorb these burgeoning philosophies. These returning delegates carried back a wealth of fresh perspectives on urban planning and architectural innovation, on the judicious structuring of civil societies, and crucially, on the peaceful arbitration of disagreements through reasoned discourse, rather than recourse to destructive conflict. Nonetheless, Athena consistently refrained from appropriating commendation for these societal advancements. When individuals expressed their gratitude, she would humbly articulate that the profound sagacity had in fact resided inherently within their own collective consciousness from the very beginning. Her intervention had merely served as a catalyst, assisting them in structuring their nascent ideas, paralleling the very genesis of her own being, which represented the masterful organization of Zeus's diffuse intellectual concepts into a coherent and distinctly purposeful form. This narrative invites contemplation upon that pivotal moment of Athena's birth, prompting reflection on how often the most significant breakthroughs originate not from external sources, but from the deliberate organization of inherent capacities. It suggests considering the myriad ideas that might be quietly incubating within one's own mental landscape, patiently awaiting the opportune moment for their complete manifestation. Furthermore, it encourages anticipation of the wisdom one might uncover in the near future, wisdom that has been subtly developing in the recesses of the mind, poised to illuminate one's perception of the world with newfound clarity. Expanding upon the profound contemplation of wisdom and the genuine essence of human values, the narrative now transitions to explore the tale of a monarch who harboured an unwavering conviction regarding his ultimate desires, only to confront the stark realization that the fulfillment of one's deepest aspirations does not invariably confer the benediction one initially envisions. This sovereign, King Midas, held dominion over the realm of Phrygia, a tranquil kingdom geographically situated within the modern-day boundaries of Turkey, where verdant, undulating hills were picturesquely punctuated by abundant olive groves and flourishing vineyards. From his majestic palace, he commanded panoramic vistas of expansive valleys, where diligent shepherds meticulously guided their woolly flocks along time-worn, ancestral pathways, and where intrepid merchants traversed parched, dusty thoroughfares laden with exotic commodities procured from far-flung territories. Though it was a domain renowned for its tranquillity and reasonably endowed with prosperity, King Midas frequently found his gaze drawn to the confines of his royal treasury, a persistent yearning stirring within him for an ever greater accumulation of its contents. Indeed, King Midas had cultivated what could aptly be described as an almost ritualistic preoccupation with inventorying his possessions. With the arrival of each new day, subsequent to partaking of his morning repast, of delicate honey cakes and fresh goat's milk, he would habitually traverse the cold stone steps leading into his subterranean treasure chamber. Within this secure vault, he would indulge in the tactile pleasure of sifting his fingers through shimmering mounds of silver coinage, elevate resplendent golden chalices to capture and refract the flickering lamplight, and meticulously align brilliant precious gems into precise, orderly formations. The subtle, resonant clicks emanating from the contact of metal and stone transmuted into a peculiar auditory delight for him, a veritable symphony of opulent prosperity. Yet Midas was soon to discern that material affluence possessed a profoundly paradoxical characteristic. The more one accumulates, the more acutely one becomes aware of what remains beyond one's grasp. His personal coffers, which had previously appeared resplendently replete, commenced to evoke a disconcerting sense of inadequacy when juxtaposed against the fabled fortunes recounted from other sovereign realms. He became privy to captivating narratives concerning Egyptian pharaohs, whose sepulchres overflowed with untold quantities of gold, of Persian monarchs whose regal diadems were adorned with gemstones rivaling the dimensions of avian eggs, and of influential merchants who commanded entire armadas of vessels, each heavily laden with invaluable cargo. During a particularly balmy afternoon, as King Midas ambled through the fragrant pathways of his meticulously cultivated rose garden, endeavouring to dislodge the persistent shimmering visions of gold from his preoccupations, his attention was arrested by an uncharacteristic disturbance emanating from the vicinity of the garden's ornamental fountain. His vigilant palace guards had come upon an individual slumbering amidst the verdant rose bushes, an elderly gentleman whose dishevelled hair was entwined with verdant foliage, and whose unassuming tunic bore telltale crimson stains of fermented grape. This unexpected guest was none other than Silenus, a jovial satyr and trusted confidant of the exuberant deity Dionysus. Silenus, it transpired, had partaken a little too exuberantly in the previous evening's revelries, and had inadvertently strayed from Dionysus's boisterous retinue, ultimately succumbing to slumber within the confines of Midas's private garden. While the majority of monarchs might have reacted with irritation at the discovery of an uninvited interloper within their secluded domains, Midas, however, found his interest considerably piqued by the enigmatic presence of this extraordinary visitor. For a full 10-day period, King Midas extended the most gracious hospitality to Silenus, treating him with the deference befitting a truly esteemed dignitary. Together they partook of lavish repasts upon the expansive palace terrace, their conversations punctuated by the breathtaking spectacle of the setting sun, which meticulously adorned the distant mountain ranges in an ethereal palette of radiant gold and deep, regal purple. Silenus regaled the monarch with captivating anecdotes of his extensive peregrinations alongside Dionysus, recounting vibrant narratives of exuberant festivals held in far-flung metropolises, of bountiful vineyards yielding wines of such exquisite sweetness that they could move mortals to tears of unadulterated bliss, and of protracted celebrations that commenced with one new moon and persisted unabated until the advent of the next. The most profound impression these narratives left upon Midas was their conspicuous absence of any discourse concerning the acquisition of material possessions. Rather, their central theme revolved entirely around the profound enrichment derived from experiencing ephemeral, yet deeply meaningful moments. Silenus eloquently articulated visions of idyllic evenings, where the harmonious strains of music and unrestrained peals of laughter appeared to elevate individuals beyond the mundane confines of their everyday anxieties, of unpretentious meals transformed into magical communion through the simple act of being shared with cherished companions, and of spirited dances that joyously endured until the first blush of dawn, precisely because no participant wished for the profound merriment to conclude. Upon the arrival of the god Dionysus, who had come to reclaim his wayward companion, he expressed such profound gratification with King Midas's exemplary hospitality that he magnanimously extended an offer to grant the monarch any boon his heart might covet. "Anything whatsoever," Dionysus declared, his divine eyes sparkling with that particular brand of playful cunning that deities occasionally exhibit when they shrewdly anticipate mortals are on the precipice of committing intriguing errors in judgment. Without a moment's pause or deliberation, Midas articulated his fervent desire. "I implore you, grant me the singular power that everything I come into contact with shall instantly transmute into pure gold." Dionysus, with a subtly arched eyebrow, inquired if the king was indeed unequivocally certain that this was his genuine and ultimate aspiration. The monarch, however, responded with an emphatic nod of enthusiastic affirmation, his mind already vividly conjuring images of the substantial heft of countless golden coins, the dazzling luminescence of resplendent golden statuary, and the boundless shimmering prosperity that he believed would imminently become his. Dionysus, with an almost imperceptible, dismissive sweep of his hand, as though casually dislodging an bothersome insect, bestowed the king's desired faculty. "Consider it accomplished," he pronounced with laconic simplicity. Subsequently, both he and Silenus took their leave, abandoning King Midas to the solitary company of his newly acquired, formidable ability. The initial experiment with his newfound gift was a relatively minor one. Midas extended his hand and made contact with a delicate rose bloom from his cherished garden. In an instantaneous metamorphosis, the tender velvety petals hardened, acquiring the unyielding texture and brilliant luster of pure gold. The resultant transformation possessed a certain undeniable, albeit cold, aesthetic splendor. Every intricate nuance of the floral structure was flawlessly retained. Each graceful curve of every individual petal was immaculately rendered in the precious metallic medium. Yet the once fragrant rose no longer diffused its sweet perfume, nor did it sway with delicate grace in the gentle caress of the passing breeze. It had been transmuted into a flawless yet utterly inert simulacrum of its former vibrant self. Nevertheless, King Midas remained profoundly exhilarated by his burgeoning power. He proceeded to perambulate throughout his opulent palace, extending his golden touch to every conceivable object within his grasp. Ordinary seating arrangements were instantly transmuted into resplendent golden chairs. Draperies once of fabric solidified into shimmering golden curtains. Even the very flagstones paving his corridors yielded to his touch, transforming into lustrous gold with each deliberate step he took upon them. By the arrival of dusk, his entire palatial residence had assumed the aspect of an otherworldly vision, a fantastical construct from the realm of dreams. Every surface now gleamed with unparalleled brilliance, every item rendered immeasurably precious, every single artifact now possessing a value that collectively surpassed the entire wealth of vast empires. The true ramifications of his extraordinary endowment commenced with the arrival of the evening meal. King Midas, physically drained from his strenuous day of incessant alchemical transmutation, settled himself at the dining table, prepared to partake of his supper. As he extended his hand to grasp a succulent grape, the fruit instantly hardened, transforming into a solid, inert, golden orb within his very grasp. He attempted to quaff a draught of wine, but the rich liquid congealed into a dense, metallic substance the instant it made contact with his parched lips. Bread, sweet honey, and even life-sustaining water suffered the same fate. Every single item he endeavoured to ingest was instantaneously rendered into unpalatable solid gold upon his touch. That initial night, Midas reclined upon his opulent golden bed, ensconced amidst golden pillows, his gaze fixed upon his resplendent golden ceiling, while his stomach painfully cramped with the gnawing pangs of profound hunger. The bitter paradox of his predicament was not lost upon his increasingly desperate mind. He had, in all likelihood, become the most affluent individual on the entire planet, yet he found himself utterly incapable of procuring even the most rudimentary sustenance. However, the most excruciating anguish manifested itself on the succeeding morning, when his cherished daughter Zoe, a beacon of light in his life, bounded joyfully towards him in her customary daily salutation. She represented the very essence of his paternal pride and boundless delight, a vivacious 10-year-old child whose innocent laughter and ceaseless inquiries about every facet of her world permeated the palace with an infectious warmth. Without a moment's conscious thought or deliberation, King Midas instinctively extended his arms to enfold her in his customary loving embrace. The resulting metamorphosis was both instantaneous and tragically irreversible. In one fleeting instant, Zoe was a vibrant, animated child, her face radiant with the unadulterated joy of a new morning. In the very next, she had become an exquisitely rendered golden effigy, perpetually immobilized in the midst of her playful stride. Her countenance, captured in an eternal tableau, perfectly retained its expression of blissful anticipation, yet she could no longer utter a single word, no longer emit her melodious laughter, nor pose the myriad boundless questions that had, in truth, captivated and delighted Midas far more profoundly than any conceivable material treasure. Midas collapsed onto his knees, his anguished frame crumpling beside the unyielding golden effigy of his beloved daughter. Copious tears coursed unchecked down his grief-stricken face, as a chilling, profound comprehension finally dawned upon him regarding the true, catastrophic cost of what he had so recklessly bartered away. The entirety of the world's accumulated gold now appeared utterly devoid of value when weighed against the simple, irreplaceable comfort of Zoe's warm, living hand nestled in his, the sweet sound of her voice softly calling, "Good morning, Papa," or her animated, excited recounting of the birds she had observed from her chamber window. For 3 agonizing days the distraught king remained prostrate beside his daughter's golden statue, utterly bereft of appetite, incapable of attaining restful slumber, and relentlessly tormented by the stark, hollow echo of his own footsteps reverberating through halls that, though now dazzlingly beautiful, had been rendered profoundly lifeless. Every object his gaze fell upon served as a poignant, agonizing memento of the irretrievable treasures he had forfeited. The transformed golden roses, once vibrant, now stood in perpetual sterile stasis, incapable of blooming. The golden fruit trees, once verdant and generous, would forevermore offer neither cooling shade nor life-giving sustenance. His once magnificent, now entirely gilded palace had been irrevocably transformed into a resplendent, yet utterly desolate sepulchre. The monarch Midas eventually journeyed to the designated river, a place Dionysus had previously indicated as his abode, should the king ever require his assistance. There the deity of wine and revelry awaited him, his presence suggesting a prescient awareness of Midas's imminent arrival. Dionysus displayed no astonishment at the sight of Midas, whose countenance was etched with weariness and profound despair. "My actions were imprudent," Midas confessed candidly, his voice heavy with remorse. "I implore you, reclaim this perilous endowment. I would willingly embrace the humblest existence, rather than remain a sovereign of immense wealth, who is forever barred from holding his own beloved daughter." Dionysus responded with a subtle inclination of his head, and gesture imbued with what appeared to be compassionate understanding. "Immerse yourself in the currents of the river Pactolus," he directed, his tone calm and authoritative. "Its purifying waters possess the power to divest you of the cursed golden touch, and subsequently you may restore all that you have involuntarily transmuted by carefully sprinkling its liquid essence upon them." With a surge of desperate hope, Midas hastened towards the flowing river and without hesitation plunged himself into its refreshing depths, still adorned in his royal garments. The profound sense of liberation that enveloped him as the burdensome power receded was an experience utterly ineffable, a weight lifted from his very soul. He diligently filled various vessels with the river's potent water and then rushed back to his grand palace, meticulously sprinkling the life-giving liquid upon every object he had unwittingly transformed, reserving his cherished daughter Zoe for the very final moment, for he was almost paralyzed by the fragility of his burgeoning hope. Yet, the instant the sacred water made contact with Zoe's immobile, golden effigy, a vibrant resurgence of colour and vital warmth infused her being, much like the first rays of dawn painting a desolate valley with light and life. Her initial gasp for air, the gentle flutter of her eyelids, and her inaugural bewildered inquiry about the peculiar stiffness she felt, these simple human sounds resonated in Midas's heart as melodies infinitely more cherished than any orchestral symphony known to mankind. Later that very evening, while they partook of a humble repast consisting merely of rustic bread and briny olives, Zoe, with a child's keen perception, inquired of her father why his demeanour appeared so profoundly altered, why he seemed to accord such heightened attention to each utterance she made. Midas, with new-found wisdom, recounted to her the intricate nature of desires, and their often unforeseen repercussions, elucidating the fundamental distinction between superficial aspirations and the genuine wellsprings of human contentment. From that pivotal day onward, Midas's royal coffers, once overflowing, maintained a modest stature, reflecting his altered priorities. Nevertheless, his profound gratitude for every single possession, however small, expanded immeasurably. He began to perceive and cherish the subtle beauty of the world, noting, for instance, the delicate manner in which the morning sunbeams illuminated Zoe's expressive face during their shared breakfast. He relished the unpretentious flavours of simple sustenance enjoyed in the cherished company of his loved ones. He dedicated extensive periods to engaging in profound discussions that, while yielding no material riches, nevertheless imbued his days with an unparalleled sense of purpose and significance. The river Pactolus, as the ancient tales recount, is still said to transport shimmering particles of gold within its flowing currents, yet these are not vestiges of Midas's ill-fated transmutive power, but rather a symbolic embodiment of the profound wisdom acquired on its banks regarding the authentic essence of life's true priorities. Occasionally, in the deep stillness of the night, when the clamour of the world has subsided into a hushed silence, one might find oneself contemplating personal aspirations, pondering the stark contrast between superficial allure and that which genuinely enriches one's existence. What unassuming delights, perhaps, have been inadvertently disregarded amidst the relentless pursuit of acquisitions deemed to possess greater worth? What fleeting instances of genuine human connection lie in wait, poised to be recognized and treasured, proving themselves infinitely more valuable than any precious metal? Shifting our focus from treasures both forfeited and reclaimed, let our narrative now gently lead us towards an ancient account that has intrigued and perplexed intellectual minds for millennia: the enthralling saga of Atlantis. This was a metropolis of such extraordinary advancement, breathtaking aesthetic appeal, and profound self-assurance that it ultimately succumbed to the ocean's depths, disappearing entirely within the span of a single tumultuous day and night. Envision for a moment an insular dominion situated far beyond the famed Pillars of Hercules, a geographical landmark now recognized as the Strait of Gibraltar. This was no mere landmass, rather it was a realm where the pinnacle of human inventiveness had forged marvels that bordered on the supernatural. The urban core of Atlantis itself was meticulously constructed in a series of flawless concentric rings, each distinct circular segment gracefully delineated by crystalline canals that shimmered with the brilliance of precious gems beneath the radiant Mediterranean sun. The inhabitants of Atlantis proudly traced their lineage directly back to Poseidon himself, the formidable Olympian deity who commanded the vast and turbulent seas. Their revered progenitor Atlas had been divinely entrusted with sovereign authority over this idyllic island sanctuary, and his progeny had, in turn, inherited not only his profound sagacity, but also an intrinsic, almost symbiotic bond with the encompassing oceanic expanse. For countless generations, these people existed in a state of exquisite equilibrium with the marine environment. Their magnificent vessels traversed vast distances to far-flung territories, not as instruments of subjugation, but rather as emissaries of commerce and enlightened instruction. Indeed, the truly extraordinary aspect of Atlantis transcended its immense material prosperity, although the city undeniably harboured treasures and affluence far exceeding mortal comprehension. The genuine marvel resided in the intricate and enlightened manner in which the Atlanteans had meticulously structured their entire civilization. They had ingeniously devised governmental frameworks that deftly reconciled the imperative of individual liberty with the overarching demands of communal obligation. Their esteemed academies of learning imparted not merely vocational proficiencies, but also profound philosophical tenets and rigorous ethical principles, fostering holistic intellectual development. Furthermore, their bustling marketplaces functioned according to unwavering doctrines of equity, thereby guaranteeing that every citizen possessed unhindered access to the essential provisions required for a fulfilling life. The very architectural design of Atlantis served as a palpable manifestation of this inherent societal equilibrium. Within the innermost, most sacred concentric ring stood the magnificent royal palace and the revered temples, meticulously constructed from resplendent white, profound black, and vivid red stones, all painstakingly extracted from the island's own geological bounty. These monumental edifices were far more than utilitarian structures. They were conceived with the express purpose of evoking awe and reverence in all who beheld them, their harmonious proportions instilling a pervasive sensation of serene tranquility and profound astonishment. The intermediate rings were dedicated to lush botanical gardens and expansive gymnasiums, providing verdant havens and athletic arenas where the citizenry could cultivate both their physical prowess and their intellectual acumen. The outermost circular segment accommodated the bustling workshops and the extensive harbours, serving as the vibrant epicenter where the practical and commercial endeavours of the city unfolded. Nevertheless, it was arguably their prodigious feats of engineering that truly commanded the greatest admiration. The Atlanteans had ingeniously conceived and implemented an intricate network of sophisticated bridges and subterranean tunnels, meticulously interconnecting all the concentric rings, thereby facilitating the seamless and highly efficient transit of both individuals and commodities throughout the sprawling metropolis. They had also pioneered advanced methodologies for environmental regulation, ensuring that their impressive structures maintained an optimal and agreeable temperature throughout the entire calendar year. Furthermore, their state-of-the-art harbours were expertly designed to host maritime vessels originating from every corner of the then-known world, equipped with ingenious mechanical apparatuses that rendered the processes of cargo loading and unloading exceptionally rapid and remarkably secure. For a great many centuries, this meticulously constructed societal framework functioned with unparalleled efficacy and grace. Atlantean navigators and intrepid explorers embarked on voyages that brought back invaluable intellectual treasures from far-flung civilizations, sophisticated mathematical principles from the ancient realm of Babylon, meticulous astronomical observations gleaned from the venerable land of Egypt, and profound philosophical insights originating from the nascent Greek city-states. Crucially, however, rather than merely assimilating these external concepts wholesale, the Atlanteans masterfully interwove them with their indigenous traditions, forging innovative syntheses that proved to be exponentially more potent and comprehensive than the mere aggregation of their constituent elements. The fateful juncture, however, manifested itself in an insidious and incremental fashion, unfolding with such imperceptible slowness that the vast majority of Atlantean citizens remained entirely oblivious to its ominous progression. Prosperity, it would appear, harbours its own inherent perils. As the magnificent city burgeoned in affluence and influence, its inhabitants gradually succumbed to the complacency of taking their extraordinary accomplishments for granted. The intricate societal and infrastructural systems which had once demanded diligent upkeep and unwavering vigilance were increasingly presumed to be inherently self-regulating and perpetually robust. Concurrently, the foundational ethical principles and guiding virtues that had steered previous generations began to be perceived as antiquated, superfluous strictures on what was now misconstrued as limitless collective potential. Subsequently, a distinct new echelon of leadership ascended to power, composed largely of individuals who had matured amidst the dazzling splendors of Atlantis, without ever having to exert effort or sacrifice to forge such achievements. Gazing upon their impeccably ordered and prosperous metropolis, they concluded that the opportune moment had arrived for outward expansion, a perceived imperative to disseminate Atlantis's purportedly superior doctrines and methodologies throughout the global community, irrespective of whether other nations desired such imposition. These newly empowered leaders commenced articulating a grand narrative of Atlantis's inherent destiny, asserting its moral obligation to shepherd and enlighten what they deemed less advanced cultures. Concomitantly, they devoted their prodigious intellects to developing military technologies that rivaled the sophistication and ingenuity of their earlier, more benevolent innovations. Their once welcomed vessels, which had previously graced foreign harbours as esteemed purveyors of commerce and enlightenment, now began to materialize as ominous heralds of impending subjugation. This profound metamorphosis permeated even the quotidian cadences of the city's existence. The vibrant public forums, once bustling arenas where citizens freely convened to engage in robust policy debates, degenerated into mere venues for the unilateral promulgation of governmental decrees. The revered educational institutions, which had once championed holistic intellectual growth, increasingly prioritized specialized technical instruction at the expense of profound ethical contemplation. Furthermore, the industrious workshops, previously dedicated to crafting items of exquisite artistry and practical efficacy, now predominantly channeled their efforts into the manufacture of armaments and instruments of subjugation. However, the Olympian deities, and most notably the formidable Zeus, observed these disquieting transformations with escalating apprehension. The Atlanteans, after all, had been endowed with their extraordinary capacities as a grand experimental endeavour into the boundless reaches of human potential, a query into what humanity might accomplish when afforded optimal circumstances and celestial tutelage. This momentous experiment was now demonstrably faltering, not as a consequence of external aggressions or unforeseen cataclysmic events, but rather owing to the deliberate, self-destructive choices being made by the Atlanteans themselves. In response to this grave situation, Zeus convened a solemn council of the gods to deliberate upon the appropriate course of action. Some divine voices advocated for direct intercession, proposing the dispatch of portents and admonitions that might yet steer Atlantis back towards its foundational principles. Others contended that the experiment ought to be permitted to run its full course, positing that even a catastrophic failure could impart invaluable wisdom. Yet, it was Zeus who ultimately rendered the decisive judgment Atlantis had evolved into a menace, not merely to other burgeoning civilizations, but to the delicate equilibrium of the entire global order. The ultimate demise arrived with terrifying celerity. Within the span of a solitary day and night, punctuated by devastating seismic tremors and torrential deluges, Atlantis was inexorably swallowed by the surging ocean. The impeccably engineered canals, once arteries of urban life, transformed into voracious conduits for the invading sea. The majestic edifices, meticulously conceived to endure for eternity, catastrophically fractured and collapsed under the immense power of forces that far surpassed their architects' most sophisticated computations. The formidable fleet of ships, which had been meticulously readied to project Atlantean dominion across the globe, was reduced to scattered fragments of wreckage, strewn across the abyssal ocean floor. Yet, what elevates the narrative of Atlantis beyond a mere chronicle of divine retribution is its profound resonance as a testament to collective memory and enduring enlightenment. While the physical obliteration was absolute, the intellectual legacy was not entirely extinguished. A fortunate few Atlanteans had been engaged in voyages abroad when the cataclysm descended, while others had prudently relocated to remote colonial settlements years prior. These scattered remnants of the Atlantean populace bore with them not solely their advanced technological expertise, but also the vivid recollection of their civilization's magnificent zenith and the tragic reasons for its precipitous decline. These dispersed fragments of Atlantean sagacity subtly permeated and significantly shaped the evolutionary trajectory of other burgeoning cultures. The profound mathematical insights, for instance, seamlessly integrated into the sophisticated astronomical practices of Babylon. The elegant architectural doctrines manifested in the monumental constructions of Egypt, and the seminal philosophical concepts contributed substantially to the efflorescence of Hellenic intellectualism, though the survivors meticulously ensured they disseminated only the constructive facets of their heritage, assiduously preserving the cautionary tales concerning hubris and the corrupting influence of unchecked authority. This enduring legacy elucidates why Plato, many centuries subsequent to these legendary events, chose to chronicle Atlantis, not in the capacity of a meticulous historical chronicler documenting empirical facts, but rather as a profound philosopher delving into abstract concepts and universal truths. He masterfully employed this compelling narrative as a vehicle to scrutinize fundamental inquiries that resonated as deeply with the citizens of ancient Athens as they continue to do with contemporary societies. What are the inevitable ramifications when a civilization's technological prowess and material capacities eclipse its moral sagacity? How does a society conscientiously uphold the foundational values that underpinned its initial triumphs, once the very notion of success becomes an unremarkable, pervasive condition? What profound ethical obligations accompany the possession of power, whether exercised by an individual or a collective entity? While the tangible city of Atlantis may have irrevocably receded beneath the ocean's surface, its more profound allegorical significance persistently re-emerges in novel manifestations. Indeed, every civilization that has ascended to remarkable heights has in due course confronted the identical pivotal dilemma that once challenged the Atlanteans, whether to harness their considerable accomplishments as instruments for constructive advancement or as armaments for destructive subjugation. One might be prompted to reflect upon the various Atlantises that exist within their individual lives. These are the intricate systems and cherished relationships meticulously constructed over time, each demanding constant diligent care and vigilant nurturing to sustain their vitality and ensure their continued well-being. Furthermore, it becomes crucial to examine the core principles and deeply held values that steer one's decisions, especially during moments of significant achievement when the allure of success can deceptively suggest that established guidelines and ethical boundaries no longer apply. Perhaps the most profound and enduring wealth lies not in the mere act of creation or accumulation, but rather in the profound sagacity required to safeguard and uphold the most essential elements of what has been brought into existence. Shifting focus from the tragic disappearance of ancient cities, the narrative now turns to the inherent changes that perpetually return, the timeless, ceaseless cycle that orchestrates the alternation of darkness and light, the profound rhythm of death and subsequent rebirth, where every conclusion inherently contains the seed of a fresh inauguration. This tale endeavours to elucidate the very genesis of the Earth's seasons and illuminate why certain pivotal journeys often compel individuals to venture farthest from their familiar abodes. At the heart of this ancient myth stands Persephone, the beloved offspring of Demeter, the revered goddess of the harvest. Persephone's formative years were spent enveloped by the boundless bounty and ceaseless profusion her divine mother meticulously cultivated. Their sanctuary was a verdant valley where the essence of spring appeared to reign perpetually. Here, blossoms invariably unfurled, trees consistently yielded their fruits, and fertile fields were perpetually poised for gathering. It was undeniably a place of exquisite beauty and unparalleled serenity, yet perhaps it offered an environment that was somewhat excessively sheltered, a touch too flawless for a youthful spirit brimming with inquisitiveness about the broader, more complex world beyond its confines. Persephone customarily passed her sunlit days meandering through lush meadows, accompanied by her cherished companions, the ocean nymphs, who had shared her adventures since their earliest childhood. Together they would pluck vibrant blossoms, fashion intricate garlands from trailing vines, recount captivating narratives, and engage in playful diversions whose sole objective was pure, unadulterated delight. It was, by all accounts, an existence of unparalleled serenity and bucolic charm. However, in recent times Persephone had begun to perceive an unfamiliar undercurrent of disquiet, a peculiar sense of burgeoning restlessness. A nascent conviction was taking root within her, suggesting that a wealth of profound experiences and invaluable insights lay patiently awaiting discovery beyond the carefully delineated boundaries of her mother's verdant, sheltered valley. Consequently, she had started to pose inquiries to Demeter, questions that invariably evoked a palpable unease in the venerable goddess of the harvest. She sought to understand the subterranean mysteries that nourished plant life, probing the very essence of growth. She wondered why certain seeds necessitated an interment in profound darkness before they could aspire towards the light. Moreover, she dared to inquire about the segment of the life cycle that her mother consistently omitted from discussion, the inevitable cessation, the process of dying, which appeared to be an indispensable precursor to any subsequent regeneration or rebirth. Whenever such probing discussions emerged, Demeter consistently redirected the conversation, artfully steering it away from uncomfortable topics. She had invested immense effort and unwavering dedication into crafting a sanctuary, a realm meticulously designed to ensure her daughter would remain utterly untouched by the spectre of loss or the pangs of suffering. The mere notion that Persephone might harbour an inquisitive inclination towards these more sombre, less palatable facets of existence profoundly disturbed her maternal sensibilities. In response, she intensified her protective oversight, redoubling her vigilance and meticulously orchestrating her daughter's daily schedule. Her aim was to inundate Persephone's hours with agreeable and diverting pursuits, hoping these pleasant distractions would effectively divert her attention from any unsettling or disquieting reflections. Yet, from the shadowy depths of his distant dominion, Hades, the formidable lord of the underworld, had been keenly observing Persephone. He had discerned her inherently inquisitive disposition, her distinct disinclination to accept superficial responses, and her remarkable bravery in articulating challenging inquiries. In stark contrast to her mother, he did not perceive these attributes as problematic or unsettling. On the contrary, he regarded them with profound admiration, recognizing a rare intellect. He saw in her the potential for an individual who could truly grasp the intricate symbiosis between darkness and light, understanding them not as antagonistic forces, but rather as indispensable collaborators in the magnificent, perpetual choreography of existence itself. The pivotal day that irrevocably altered the course of events commenced in a manner indistinguishable from any other. Persephone, alongside her steadfast companions, was engaged in the serene act of collecting blossoms within a meadow that, on that particular morning, exuded an especially captivating charm. The verdant turf yielded softly beneath their steps, while the atmosphere, warm and imbued with the luscious fragrance of burgeoning narcissus, enveloped them gently. Persephone's attention became singularly captivated by a specific bloom, a narcissus that radiated an intensity of colour and vitality surpassing all others, its delicate petals shimmering as they ensnared the sunlight in a manner almost mesmerizing. As she inclined herself to pluck this singularly remarkable flower, the very ground beneath her feet dramatically sundered. Yet, rather than plummeting precipitously, she perceived herself being tenderly cradled and elevated by unseen forces, conveyed downwards through successive strata of rich earth and ancient stone, into subterranean grottos that gleamed with an astonishing array of precious gems and lustrous metals. The descent, while undeniably instilling a sense of trepidation, was simultaneously an experience of profound marvel. She was, in that moment, beholding regions of the world that no mortal being had ever before witnessed or traversed. Upon her arrival in the underworld, she found herself not in the grim confines of a captive, but rather welcomed as an honoured visitor within a palatial abode that far surpassed the grandeur of her wildest imaginings. The vast echoing halls of this subterranean dwelling were meticulously sculpted from obsidian marble, exquisitely veined with shimmering silver, and illuminated by ethereal flames that, remarkably, cast no shadows and emanated a gentle warmth devoid of any smoke. Gardens, too, flourished within this nether realm, yet they bore no resemblance to the verdant expanses of the world above. Here, botanical wonders unfurled their beauty in perpetual twilight. Trees bore astonishing fruits of pure silver and resplendent gold, and blossoms, instead of diffusing sweet perfumes, released soft, enchanting melodies into the still air. Hades extended a greeting to her marked by a solemn and formal courtesy, clarifying that his action in bringing her to his domain was not driven by self-interest or arbitrary will. Rather, It stemmed from his profound conviction that she alone possessed the unique capacity to genuinely comprehend the intricate interplay of both realms, the vibrant sphere of burgeoning growth and lavish abundance situated above, and the profound dominion of essential repose and perpetual transformation that lay beneath. He graciously proposed to reveal to her the intricate mechanisms of his realm, the sophisticated systems that rendered renewal and continuity achievable in the terrestrial world. The revelations Persephone encountered profoundly dislodged every preconceived notion she had assimilated concerning mortality and cessation. The underworld, far from being a sombre locus of retribution or eternal damnation, unveiled itself as an immense, sophisticated system of ecological recycling, a serene sanctuary where departed souls found respite and underwent a process of rejuvenation between their successive incarnations. She observed with discerning eyes the meticulous methodology through which the vital essence of completed existences was transmuted into the latent potential for nascent development. Through these observations, she assimilated critical insights into the delicate equilibrium indispensable for ensuring the enduring viability and sustainability of life on the surface world. Concurrently, in the vibrant upper world, Demeter had become acutely aware of her beloved daughter's sudden disappearance, plunging her into a tempest of frantic grief and incandescent fury. Overwhelmed by her anguish, she utterly relinquished her sacred responsibilities as the revered goddess of the harvest, embarking on a relentless, sorrowful odyssey across the entire earth, in a desperate quest for Persephone. Deprived of Demeter's vital attention and nurturing influence, the cultivated crops began to languish and fail catastrophically. Fruit-bearing trees ceased their generous yields. Even the verdant grasses, once robust, started to shrivel and perish. The perpetual spring that had characterized Demeter's cherished realm yielded abruptly to an unprecedented phenomenon, a desolate, biting cold ushering in a season of profound scarcity and arduous anticipation, entirely unknown to the world before. Mortal inhabitants commenced to endure immense hardship as sustenance grew increasingly scarce, and the very planet itself appeared to retract its life-sustaining embrace. They implored the Olympian deities for succor, yet Demeter remained utterly impervious to their fervent entreaties. She resolutely vowed that she would not reinstate the earth's former bounty until her cherished daughter was safely restored to her maternal care. Witnessing the escalating severity of this global catastrophe, Zeus, the sovereign of the gods, ultimately deemed it necessary to intercede. He dispatched Hermes, the swift-footed messenger of the divine pantheon, to undertake delicate negotiations with Hades for Persephone's repatriation. However, upon Hermes' arrival in the chthonic realm, he encountered a considerably intricate predicament. Persephone had, in fact, partaken of the sustenance of the underworld, yet her consumption was not the result of coercion or cunning deception. Instead, she had made a deliberate and autonomous decision to sample a modest quantity of seeds from a pomegranate, thereby consciously embracing the inherent ramifications of that action. More significantly, Persephone had come to a profound realization. She no longer harbored a desire to revert to her former existence on a permanent basis. The profound insights and accumulated wisdom she had acquired during her sojourn in the underworld had fundamentally transformed her perspective. She now fully comprehended the underlying reasons for the disquietude she had experienced within her mother's meticulously guarded valley. She had, in essence, been intuitively perceiving the inherent incompleteness of experiencing only a singular facet of existence, its grand, encompassing cycle. The resolution that ultimately crystallized from these complex diplomatic discussions achieved a measure of contentment for all parties involved, albeit necessitating a degree of relinquishment from each. Persephone was decreed to spend a portion of every annual cycle within the underworld, residing with Hades, during which time she would delve deeper into the profound mysteries of mortality and metamorphic processes. For the remaining duration of the year, she would ascend to the terrestrial world, carrying with her the invaluable sagacity and enlightened perspectives she had accumulated in the subterranean realm. When Persephone eventually returned for her inaugural reunion with Demeter, both mother and daughter had been irrevocably altered by their period of enforced estrangement. Demeter had come to a poignant realization. Her fiercely protective maternal affection, when extended to an absolute extreme, possessed the potential to inadvertently construct a confinement of its own making. Persephone, for her part, had acquired an expansive body of knowledge that rendered her a more fully realized individual, a being who now encompassed a profound understanding of both elation and lament, of vibrant expansion and essential dormancy, of both nascent beginnings and inevitable conclusions. Their poignant reunion heralded the resurgence of bountiful plenty across the earth. Yet this renewed abundance manifested as a distinct variation from its former iteration, characterized by a greater intricacy, an enhanced sustainability, and a more grounded realism. The world, from that point forward, began to experience the rhythmic progression of distinct seasons, eras of generous profusion now interchanged with intervals of profound scarcity. Vigorous epochs of growth were succeeded by essential periods of dormancy and restoration. This cyclical pattern was neither a punitive measure nor a deficit, but rather signified a more advanced and nuanced comprehension of how natural cycles intrinsically operate. During the specific months when Persephone resided upon the surface world, the earth burst forth with the vibrant efflorescence of spring and flourished luxuriantly throughout the summer. Conversely, during her sojourn in the depths below, autumn ushered in the critical period of harvest, while winter brought forth the imperative time of rejuvenation. Agriculturalists, in turn, learned to harmoniously align their practices with these inherent rhythms, rather than striving against them, diligently accumulating and preserving the abundance garnered from the growing season to sustain themselves through the leaner, fallow interims. However, the most profound and enduring legacy of Persephone's transformative journey was the profound sagacity she repatriated concerning the indispensable nature of arduous experiences. She had assimilated the fundamental truth that certain forms of profound development are exclusively attainable within the embrace of obscurity, that particular manifestations of resilience and fortitude emerge solely through confronting formidable challenges, and that specific modalities of comprehension arise only from the lived experience of both privation and subsequent restoration. Consequently, she evolved into a beacon and guide for mortal beings as they confronted their own inevitable and often arduous descents, those junctures when existence compelled them to relinquish customary comforts and venture intrepidly into uncharted domains. Her enduring narrative served as a potent reminder that such odysseys, however daunting or perilous they might initially appear, frequently culminated in revelations that rendered the voyagers more integrated, more proficient, and more authentically vibrant in their being. The ancient Hellenic peoples who first articulated this seminal narrative grasped a profound truth regarding the trajectory of human maturation. They understood that individuals cannot perpetually reside within the sheltered, idyllic springtimes of their formative years. True maturity, it was recognized, necessitates an acceptance and reconciliation with the inherent cycles of both forfeiture and subsequent recuperation. Furthermore, genuine wisdom frequently emerges from a deliberate and courageous engagement with experiences that, at their outset, may appear menacing or profoundly unappealing. As the various epochs of one's personal existence continue their timeless cyclical rotation, it becomes pertinent to contemplate the profound insights Persephone garnered during her chthonic journey. These include the understanding that, at times, the most profound and transformative growth unfolds within the most obscure and challenging circumstances. It reveals that conclusions invariably create the necessary void for nascent inaugurations. And crucially, it underscores that the fortitude to confront arduous transitions frequently culminates in discoveries of far greater intrinsic worth than the familiar solace one might relinquish. One is thus prompted to ponder what latent seeds of potential might lie dormant, poised to germinate within the fallow seasons of their own lived experience. From the tale of Persephone's willing journey into the nether realms, our narrative now shifts to an altogether different subterranean expedition. This particular odyssey, however, was not impelled by mere inquisitiveness, but rather by an affection so profound it dared to defy the very foundational principles of existence itself. This is the chronicle of Orpheus, a legendary figure whose melodic prowess could compel unyielding stones to shift and ferocious beasts to gentle their wild spirits, and whose boundless devotion to Eurydice impelled him to undertake the seemingly insurmountable. Orpheus was the esteemed progeny of one of the venerable 9 Muses, those divine sisters who served as the wellspring of inspiration for all artistic endeavours and intellectual pursuits. From the tenderest years of his childhood, he had exhibited an unparalleled, almost preternatural aptitude for the art of music. When his fingers danced across the strings of his lyre, an instrument of exquisite beauty said to have been personally fashioned by the Olympian god Apollo, even mighty rivers would perceptibly slacken their currents, as if pausing to absorb every single note. Towering trees would incline their branches, straining to capture each delicate inflection, and even the most formidable creatures of the wild would recline in hushed stillness, utterly captivated by the intricate tapestries of sound that seemed to encapsulate the full spectrum of the world's myriad joys and profound sorrows. His musical compositions were not merely aesthetically pleasing, they possessed an inherent transformative power. Agrarians observed that their crops flourished with unprecedented abundance whenever the distant strains of Orpheus's practice sessions reached their fields. Shepherds discovered that their flocks remained remarkably serene and robust when his enchanting melodies wafted across the rolling hillsides. Even within the bustling confines of urban centres, citizens reported that long-standing disputes became remarkably simpler to resolve, and the monotony of daily chores felt considerably less onerous on those auspicious days when Orpheus graced the public squares with a performance. Yet, despite the immeasurable felicity his harmonies bestowed upon countless others, Orpheus himself frequently wrestled with a pervasive sense of solitude. He possessed the extraordinary capacity to sway vast throngs to either tearful emotion or exuberant mirth, to inspire them towards acts of profound benevolence or unwavering courage. Nevertheless, he yearned deeply for a kindred spirit who could comprehend not merely the intricate beauty of his compositions, but also the nuanced individual who resided behind the music. He sought someone who perceived him as more than a mere vessel for exquisite sounds, a channel for ethereal melodies. He ultimately discovered this profound connection in Eurydice, a graceful wood nymph whose inherent gifts seamlessly complemented his own exceptional talents. While Orpheus possessed the unique ability to craft music that articulated every conceivable human emotion, Eurydice in turn possessed an innate, almost mystical understanding of the natural world. This profound intuition enabled her to discern subtle meanings within his musical creations that eluded the grasp of others. She could attentively listen to one of his intricate melodies and instinctively discern whether it had been conceived at the golden blush of dawn or the melancholic descent of twilight, whether he had been observing the majestic flight of eagles or the graceful dance of fish beneath the water's surface, whether his heart had been brimming with unbridled hope or shadowed by a touch of poignant melancholy. Their courtship unfolded with the unhurried grace of a protracted tender melody. They would often wander hand in hand through the verdant depths of ancient forests, where Orpheus would play his lyre with a soft, intimate touch, while Eurydice, with her keen perception, would highlight the distinct ways in which various creatures responded to the different musical phrases. It was she who imparted to him the art of seamlessly weaving the organic sounds of nature, the vibrant calls of birds, the gentle rustling of wind through the leaves, the soothing murmur of water flowing over polished stones, into the very fabric of his intricate compositions. In return, he elucidated for her how the complex tapestry of human emotions could be expressed through the nuanced interplay of rhythm and melody in ways that mere spoken words could never adequately convey. Their nuptial ceremony was a grand affair, celebrated with equal fervour by both the venerable gods of Olympus and the mortal inhabitants of the earth. Apollo himself graciously provided the musical accompaniment for the sacred rites, though he humbly conceded that his own masterful performance seemed somewhat understated when compared to the astonishing achievements of his gifted student. The 9 muses, resplendent in their divine grace, were all in attendance, each contributing her unique artistic endowment to ensure the celebration's absolute perfection. Hymen, the benevolent deity of marriage, bestowed his sacred blessings upon their union, offering heartfelt prayers for a future filled with enduring happiness and shared creative endeavours. For a fleeting, precious interval, their shared existence was the very embodiment of their deepest aspirations. They constructed a modest, unpretentious dwelling nestled within a secluded grove, a location celebrated for its flawless acoustics, perfectly suited for the creation of music. Their mornings typically commenced with Orpheus immersed in the act of composing, while Eurydice diligently tended to their burgeoning garden. Each was profoundly attuned to the rhythmic cadence of the other's activities, their individual pursuits converging to forge a harmonious synergy far greater than either could have achieved in isolation. Evenings were affectionately dedicated to the mutual sharing of the day's fresh discoveries, a novel melody Orpheus had meticulously developed, or an unusual bird call Eurydice had painstakingly learned to mimic with uncanny precision. However, their idyllic happiness did not escape the notice of others, not all of whom harboured benevolent intentions. Aristaeus, a minor deity who had long harboured an unrequited desire for Eurydice, observed their profound contentment with a burgeoning corrosive resentment. Prior to her marriage, he had frequently offered Eurydice lavish gifts and persistent attention, and her gentle yet resolute rejections had inflicted a wound upon his considerable pride far deeper than he was willing to acknowledge. One fateful afternoon, while Orpheus was away, engaged in a consultation with fellow musicians, Aristaeus seized the opportunity to approach Eurydice in her tranquil garden. His initial attempts at engaging her in conversation were met with polite but unequivocally clear rebuffs. When his persistence escalated, and he began to suggest that she deserved a husband superior to a mere musician, Eurydice instinctively began to retreat towards the sanctuary of the forest, hoping to elude him amidst the dense foliage where she could navigate with greater agility than he. In her desperate haste to escape his unwelcome advances, she inadvertently stepped upon a venomous serpent that lay concealed, slumbering in the tall grass. The resulting bite was instantaneous and irrevocably fatal. By the time Orpheus returned to their home and discovered her lifeless form, her spirit had already embarked upon its inexorable journey to the underworld, leaving behind only the diminishing warmth of a body that no longer contained the cherished essence of the soul he adored. The depth of Orpheus's grief was an affliction unlike anything the world had ever witnessed or endured. His heartbroken lamentations were so profoundly sorrowful that they profoundly disrupted the very equilibrium of the natural world. Trees, in an unnatural display of sympathy, shed their leaves prematurely, out of season. Rivers swelled and overflowed their banks, as if weeping torrents of tears in empathy. Wild animals, typically elusive, emerged from their concealed sanctuaries, not, as before, drawn by the captivating beauty of his melodies, but rather compelled by a sorrow so utterly profound it seemed to resonate with every creature that had ever experienced the pangs of loss. For what seemed like an eternity, Orpheus was incapacitated by his despair, able to do nothing but sit vigil beside Eurydice's grave, playing melodies that articulated the raw, unadulterated essence of his anguish. Yet, gradually, a daring, unprecedented idea began to coalesce within his shattered mind. His music had consistently demonstrated the capacity to achieve the seemingly impossible. Why, then, should the ultimate barrier of death prove to be any different from any other formidable obstacle? If his extraordinary songs possessed the power to relocate unyielding stones and pacify raging storms, perhaps they could also sway the hardened hearts of the formidable deities who held dominion over the shadowy underworld. Disregarding the earnest counsel of every individual who knew him, Orpheus resolved to embark upon a perilous descent into the spectral realm of Hades, there to personally petition for Eurydice's miraculous repatriation. He navigated his way to one of the clandestine entrances to the underworld, a cavern so profoundly deep and shrouded in perpetual gloom that no mortal adventurer had ever successfully returned from its abyssal explorations. Yet Orpheus entered this formidable chasm armed with nothing but his cherished lyre, placing unwavering trust in the protective power of his music, where conventional weapons and armour would prove utterly futile. The arduous journey through the underworld unfolded like a traverse across a desolate landscape, composed entirely of solidified sorrow. He passed through vast, echoing caverns where the very walls seemed to weep perpetually, traversed rivers whose currents were formed from the ceaseless tears of those who eternally mourned, and wound through desolate valleys where the pervasive mist was, in essence, the coalesced final sighs of the departed. But everywhere he ventured, the ethereal strains of his music preceded him, a beacon in the gloom, and the spectral inhabitants of this realm, beings long accustomed to an eternity of profound sadness, found themselves experiencing a sensation they had all but forgotten, the fragile, flickering ember of hope. Even Cerberus, the monstrous three-headed hound that vigilantly guarded the formidable gates of Hades, found his formidable spirit profoundly stirred by Orpheus's heart-wrenching lament. Instead of launching a ferocious assault upon the living intruder, the colossal beast, in an unprecedented display, lowered all three of his formidable heads and allowed his multiple eyes to slowly close, lulled into a state of profound, peaceful slumber by melodies that spoke of a love so potent, so utterly transcendent, that it effortlessly bridged the chasm between the realms of life and death. When Orpheus finally arrived before the majestic throne room of Hades and Persephone, his evocative music had, in essence, already announced his presence. The formidable rulers of the underworld sat in solemn anticipation, fully cognizant that they were on the cusp of hearing a supplication unlike any that had ever been presented within the vast expanse of their domain. Orpheus, with an unparalleled emotional intensity, played for them the entire poignant narrative of his profound affection for Eurydice, their initial, fated encounter, the blossoming of their tender courtship, the fleeting period of their shared happiness, and the utterly devastating loss that had befallen him. But more than merely recounting a story, he played the very essence of love itself, crafting melodies that stirred within even these divine beings forgotten memories of cherished connections they held dear, of profound losses they had personally endured, and of the fundamental ways in which caring deeply for another soul imparts to life its most profound and enduring significance. Persephone, who, perhaps more acutely than any other, comprehended the piercing agony of separation from those held dear, openly wept, her tears a testament to the raw emotion evoked by the music. Hades, typically impervious to the desperate entreaties of mortal beings, found himself unexpectedly recalling his own profound yearning during those desolate months when Persephone was compelled to reside in the upper world. For the first and only time in the long and storied history of their shadowy realm, the formidable rulers of the dead reluctantly consented to release a mortal soul back into the vibrant embrace of life. However, their extraordinary beneficence was not without its stringent stipulations. Eurydice was permitted to return with Orpheus to the sunlit upper world. Yet, during their arduous journey out of the underworld, he was absolutely forbidden to cast a single glance back at her. He was compelled to implicitly trust that she was faithfully following him. He was required to possess unwavering faith in that which remained unseen. He was, in essence, commanded to demonstrate that his profound love was sufficiently robust to act purely upon belief, rather than demanding constant tangible confirmation. The journey back towards the world of the living commenced with an outpouring of unbridled joy. Orpheus could distinctly perceive the soft cadence of Eurydice's footsteps trailing behind him, He could sense her ethereal presence with the same intuitive certainty he had always possessed when she was near. They meticulously retraced their path through the labyrinthine caverns and desolate valleys of the underworld, steadily progressing towards the faint, beckoning light that signified the boundary between the realm of the departed and the vibrant land of the living. But as they ascended the final arduous passage leading towards the surface, an insidious tendril of doubt began to insinuate itself into Orpheus's mind. The footsteps behind him seemed to grow imperceptibly fainter. The once certain sense of Eurydice's presence felt increasingly tenuous, less assured. What if the formidable gods had in fact cruelly deceived him? What if he was climbing towards the radiant light utterly alone, while Eurydice remained irrevocably ensnared below? What if his steadfast faith had been tragically misplaced, and his beloved was, even at that very moment, being inexorably dragged back into the abyssal depths he would never again be permitted to enter? Just as the gaping mouth of the cave finally became visible, just as the warm, life-giving sunlight of the upper world began to gently caress his anxious face, Orpheus's fragile faith tragically faltered. He impulsively turned to cast a glance backward, desperate to reassure himself that Eurydice was indeed truly there, and she was for a mere fleeting instant. He saw her beloved face, observed her tenderly reaching towards him with an expression of profound love and understanding. But in that very same heart-wrenching moment, she began to rapidly fade, her form dissolving like mist. She was inexorably called back to the underworld, a consequence of his breaking the god's solemn condition. Her final words to him were not uttered in reproach, but rather resonated with the enduring power of love. She understood implicitly why he had looked back, and in that understanding she forgave him for the doubt that had, in that single instant, undone them both, as she vanished back into the impenetrable darkness. She bestowed upon him a gentle smile, imbued with the same profound and tender understanding that had initially captivated his heart and drawn him to her. Orpheus re-emerged from the underworld in profound solitude, his spirit crushed by a second, even more cataclysmic loss than the first. The weight of this renewed desolation was intensified by the agonizing knowledge that he, himself, had been the architect of its tragic conclusion. In a desperate, futile attempt to reverse his fate, he sought to re-enter the cavern that had served as his passage, only to discover its entrance irrevocably sealed. The divine clemency, once offered and then spurned by his own fateful glance, would not be extended again by the celestial powers. Consequently, he spent the remainder of his mortal existence as an itinerant minstrel, a peripatetic troubadour whose melodies now carried a resonant blend of profound melancholy and sagacity, rendering them even more compelling than any music he had crafted before. People, drawn by an inexplicable pull, journeyed from remote territories and far-flung regions not because his haunting strains elicited happiness or instilled cheerfulness, but because his artistry offered solace in comprehending their own bereavements, their own internal conflicts between conviction and uncertainty, and their own experiences of cherishing with such intensity that the imminence of severance felt nearly insufferable. The timeless narrative of Orpheus and Eurydice has been recounted through countless generations, perpetuated across millennia, precisely because it resonates with an inherent truth, addressing a fundamental aspect of the human condition. All individuals invariably encounter moments when they must proceed with conviction in the absence of absolute assurance, when affection necessitates placing one's confidence in the intangible or unverified. Furthermore, the allure of retrospection, the impulse to glance behind, to seek verification when called upon to have faith, is a temptation universally recognized. As one's thoughts meander into repose, the narrative prompts introspection regarding what this venerable tale might subtly reveal about the essence of conviction and skepticism. One might ponder what personal odysseys in one's own life necessitate belief over absolute certainty, or what interpersonal bonds demand an acceptance of their veracity, even when one lacks tangible or empirical substantiation. Perhaps the most profound symphony of existence, the highest form of human artistry, is not made with instruments or vocal cords, but with the fortitude to persevere on an illuminated path, even when one is prevented from verifying the steadfast presence of affection in one's wake.